Harry collapsed. His sweat-slick hands clawed at the railing of his private lab, fingers scraping metal as he dragged himself toward the panic button. Inch by inch, his strength failed him. His grip slipped. His knees buckled. His body hit the cold floor with a dull, final sound. Lying there, breath shallow and uneven, Harry felt his life bleeding away and his thoughts drifted backward. He had lived a life most people could only imagine. A prodigy. A pioneer. The youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for his revolutionary work in automation, discoveries that had powered humanity's expansion into the solar system and beyond. His name carried weight in academic circles, spoken with awe and envy in equal measure. His genius had brought him obscene wealth. In a dying world, money bought miracles. An orbital residence with pools and tennis courts. Personal laboratories stocked with the most advanced technology Earth could offer. Experimental treatments that extended life far beyond natural limits. But wealth, he had learned, was not everything. Harry's eyes fluttered open. Harsh fluorescent lights stabbed into his vision. He tried to raise a hand to shield his face, but his arm barely twitched before falling back onto the bed. Weak. Heavy. Useless. He slowly took in the room. White walls. Sterile equipment. A private medical suite designed more for comfort than hope. Not dead yet, he thought, a trace of dry humor clinging to his consciousness. Doctors moved around him with practiced urgency, attaching leads and sensors, murmuring data back and forth. Cool medicine flooded his veins, artificial strength coursing through his failing body. He knew the compounds well. Rare. Experimental. Ruinously expensive. The only thing keeping him alive. My disease. His voice barely sounded like his own. Thin. Fragile. As if decades had been stolen from him overnight. A doctor leaned into his view, expression neutral, professional. The lesions have returned. This time they've spread to your heart and brain. Surgery. The word scraped out of him, bringing with it memories of months trapped in recovery beds, waiting for the disease to resurface again. It always did. The doctor shook his head. It's too late for that. The latest progression caused critical damage to your nervous system. The nerves in your right arm are dead. Muscle decay is accelerating faster than regeneration. We're flushing your system, but we're losing the race. How? His voice broke. He swallowed, forcing the words out. How long? The doctor hesitated. A month. Maybe 2. And you'll be confined to this bed the entire time. Harry stared at the ceiling. Death. Such a simple word. So absolute. He wasn't even 40. The doctor continued speaking, but the words blurred together. Other options, euthanasia. Avatar program. It wasn't until the following day that Harry could think clearly. The panic had dulled, replaced by cold logic. He evaluated his options like any other problem. Option 1, die. Inelegant. Unacceptable. Option 2, find a cure. He had already poured billions into the world's best medical research facilities. Years of effort had yielded nothing. Betting his existence on a sudden breakthrough was wishful thinking at best. Option 3, experimental solutions. Cybernetic replacement. Consciousness uploads. Cloned bodies. Science fiction made real for those wealthy enough to afford it. But human-to-human consciousness transfer remained flawed. Genetic incompatibilities caused data corruption. Immortality, it seemed, was still just out of reach. As he scrolled through research files on his hollow tablet, one paper caught his attention. Pandora. He knew the name well. A moon rich in resources, fiercely protected by an indigenous species called the Gnostics. What caught his interest wasn't the mining reports, but the Avatar program. Hybrid bodies grown from human and Gnostics DNA. Vessels designed to house human consciousness temporarily. One question echoed in his mind. Why temporary? Sir, are you certain about this? Katie Soul sat beside his bed, hollow tablet in hand. CEO. Executor. The woman who managed his empire and turned his discoveries into global infrastructure. It's only money, Harry said calmly. You're liquidating everything, she pressed. Stocks, assets, patents. You're getting barely 40 cents on the dollar. If we wait. Money won't matter where I'm going. She tried again. If we... No, his voice, though weak, was final. Talk to me about preparations. I have a week before the procedure. I need every second. Katie sighed. I've assembled a dedicated research team. Everything you requested is extensive. Transporting it to Pandora won't be easy. The cargo fees alone. If the ship isn't big enough, buy a bigger one. They aren't cars. Then build one. He coughed, the sound sharp and painful. Cost is irrelevant. She handed him the hollow pad, resignation clear in her eyes. Sign here. Harry signed without hesitation. His life, quite literally, rested in her hands. With the time he had left, he immersed himself in knowledge. The Gnostics. Their culture. Their language. He devoured every paper written by Dr. Grace Augustine, memorizing customs, beliefs, and biological studies. Language was harder. Complex. Fluid. Alive. He recorded another message for Katie. I want every recorded interaction analyzed. Feed their movements and speech into our machine learning models. I need a training system ready before arrival. When he finished, Harry leaned back and stared at the images filling his display. Lush jungles. Floating mountains. Bioluminescent forests glowing like living stars. For the first time in months, he smiled. Pandora looked like a good place to start over. It was a strange thing, walking willingly toward his own end. Harry lay still as he was wheeled into the upload chamber, the ceiling lights sliding past in a slow procession. Doctors and scientists in pristine white coats moved around him with rehearsed precision, voices calm, hands steady. This was the final journey for his human body. Each breath felt heavier than the last, his chest rising with effort as the machinery prepared to take over. His consciousness would be digitized and stored aboard the ship until his avatar body was ready to receive it. What happened to his soul after that? Well, opinions differed. Harry found he no longer cared. They lifted him carefully and lowered him into the chamber. The green foam molded around his frame, warm and oddly reassuring as cables connected to his temples and spine. He turned his head slightly and found Katie standing nearby, the only visitor he had allowed. Is everything ready? He asked quietly. All preparations complete? She nodded, eyes shining as she fought to keep her composure. And the drones, you'll need to. It's all done, she said quickly. Orders are coming in daily. For all the damage your asset liquidation caused, your purchases might actually spark an economic boom. He attempted a laugh, but it dissolved into a weak exhale. Harry raised a hand toward one of the doctors. Bring it over. Katie frowned. Bring what? The doctor passed him a hollow tablet. With the last of his strength, Harry scrawled his signature across the document. His arm fell limp immediately after. He looked back at Katie and smiled. A final gift. For everything you've done. And everything you're about to do. Her eyes widened. She snatched the tablet and read the title. Last Will and Testament of Harry Moore. Her breath caught as she read on. I, being of sound body and mind, hereby transfer all assets upon my death to Katie's soul. How? Why? No, she whispered. You can't. Money is influence, Harry said gently. Power. It can shape destinies or ruin them. But at the end of the day, it's just money. People are what matter. He gave the doctor a small nod. As the lid descended and the machine began to hum, Harry spoke his final words. See you on the other side. His eyes opened to green light. Glowing irises reflected in the curved interior of the capsule as blue hands rose into view. Sensation flooded him. Weight. Balance. Strength. He inhaled sharply, the air rich and clean in a way he had never known before. Slowly, he pushed himself upright. His limbs trembled, but beneath the weakness was something else. Power. Potential. The room was a muted gray, one wall mirrored. Harry stared at his reflection for the first time. Tall. Blue. Broad-shouldered. The intricate markings across his skin traced unfamiliar patterns, and yet there was something undeniably him in the face staring back. He felt different. He felt alive. Harry, can you hear me? A voice crackled through the speakers. Yeah, he replied, surprised by the depth of his own voice. We're at Pandora? Yes, sir. We're in orbit. Descent preparations are underway. Your avatar was awakened from cryo as requested. The room's sealed so we can simulate the atmosphere. Good. He stood, grabbing the table to steady himself. You've been asleep for 5 years, the voice continued. We stimulated your muscles as much as possible, but you'll need time to rebuild your strength. My preparations? Harry asked. Katie was. All completed as ordered. Harry spotted a hollow tablet and a breathing mask on the side table. He skimmed the data and smiled. Katie had exceeded even his expectations. His life on Pandora had begun. Harry stood on the bridge of the shuttle. His shuttle. He crouched instinctively, his head brushing the ceiling designed for humans, not Gnostics. A mask covered his face as the vessel plunged toward the surface. On approach, the pilot called. Home base, do you copy? Home base copies. This is Dragon ship descending. Landing zone is clear. Welcome to Pandora. Harry stared out at the world below. Oceans shimmered. Forests pulsed with life. The planet felt awake. Behind it loomed the massive gas giant, watching like a silent guardian. It's beautiful, Harry said softly. That it is, sir, the pilot replied. Heard you were someone important back on Earth. Retirement, huh? Harry laughed, really laughed, pain-free for the first time in years. Something like that. Now I'm just another blue monkey. Well, sir, you've got enough cargo to keep us busy for months. The shuttle pierced the atmosphere. Pandora welcomed him home. This isn't a tourist attraction. Harry listened with mild interest as the head of security barked orders. Miles Quaritch stood rigid, scarred, and radiating barely restrained hostility. I don't care how rich you are on Earth, Quaritch continued. Pandora will chew you up if you step outside this base. I think. Everything that crawls, flies, or slithers out there wants you dead, Quaritch snapped, jabbing a finger into Harry's chest. And unless you brought an army, you're out of luck. My preparations have been. Preparations? Quaritch scoffed. I was first recon. Best of the best. Almost lost my head to one of those things. This place doesn't care about your plans. Harry smiled. The same smile he'd given teachers, officials, and every authority figure who'd ever underestimated him. We understand each other perfectly. He turned and walked away. The base buzzed with activity. Mining equipment thundered in and out. Arrows littered walkways and tires. Mercenaries patrolled every corridor. In a courtyard bursting with alien flora, scientists tended to Pandora's wonders. Soon, Harry thought. Parker Selfridge greeted him with practiced enthusiasm. Welcome. I must say, we were surprised someone of your standing would come here. My thanks for allowing the intrusion, Harry replied smoothly. Nonsense. The board has authorized full cooperation. Harry nodded. I'll be establishing myself independently. I'll be out of your base shortly. The tour revealed massive operations. Expanding pits. Endless ambition. And the natives? Harry asked. The executive shrugged. They'll be relocated. Or removed. Harry stopped walking. Be careful, he said calmly. A people who survived here for thousands of years without technology may outlast even humanity's strongest machines. He left the executive speechless. Pandora had given him a second life, and he intended to use it well.
Hey everyone, welcome to FanFic Canon. Thanks for hitting play. I'm thrilled to bring this fan-made story to life for you. If you enjoy the ride and want more narrated fanfics, smash, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if you want audiobook of a novel of your choice, join my Patreon. Request any title that's freely available online, and I'll produce a full narration just for you. Now, let's dive into today's adventure.
Crash. His avatar's body fell to the soft soil as he leapt off the climbing wall, his feet sinking down from the sheer force. With shocking force, he flexed his muscles and accelerated down the obstacle course, leaping, diving, and climbing over the wooden frames with an ease that humans could only envy. 2 other blue figures chased after him, and soon enough overtook him. As Harry approached the final hurdle, he could see the arrogant avatars waving at him from the finish line, with easy smiles. I'm staring to hate, You guys. Harry stumbled out over his ragged breathing. The two avatars, Rye and Willow, laughed, then in a gesture of their blooming friendship, gave him one of the purple fruits that grew nearby. Harry bit into the fruit with relish, the now familiar flavor slipping down his throat and restoring much of the energy lost from the race. You've only been here 2 weeks. It takes humans years to build the muscle mass and coordination you've gotten already. Keep training, and in a few more weeks, and this obstacle will become too easy for you to seriously tax yourself on. Rye responded, and Willow nodded in agreement. Well, I suppose that only leaves one option. Harry paused as he took the final bite of his fruit. He chucked the husk on the nearby soil. Last one back cooks dinner, and with those words, he took off back over the course, to beat them back using every advantage he had, even cheating. Harry walked through the base, now experienced enough to dodge the constant movement of troops, trucks, and materials with ease. He was finally comfortable in his own skin, where he could take advantage of the Navi's superior physical attributes. He looked at his clothes and could stop his lips from curving up. It was such a small thing, but having to prepare avatar-size clothing that was durable enough was a challenge. There was the added and unexpected discomfort that clothes brought. He supposed the Navi bodies has adapted over thousands of years to be without clothing, and now human avatars were trying to change that biology. Let's just say there is a reason why avatars, and himself, prefer to wear minimal layers, and it wasn't to do with the heat. One disappointment of his trip was Grace Augustine. He had read and researched much about the Navi through her publishments, however, every time he attempted to ingratiate himself with her, he was rebuffed. After several attempts, one of her assistants had explained it to him. Apparently, she was not a fan that her life work had been manipulated to give the uber-wealthy a second chance at life. Still, Harry had spent much of the time when he wasn't training his new body with scientists and experts on Pandora. There was some initial friction, as many of the labs had been designed for scientists of human size. But this was solved with one of his custom-made holo tablets fitted for him and a mask to allow him longer access to labs with Earth's atmosphere. After his midday meal in the canteen, he walked back to the training yard and picked up some of the weights and started getting his reps in. His training was supervised by several of the Avatar's experts, a privilege granted to him by Selfridge, to build up his strength enough to the point where he can start his combat training. Being a scientist for his human life, and having the luxury of wealth, Harry had never experienced the need to fight for his own safety, and therefore lacked the skills that many of the mercenaries of the site took for granted. Knowing the dangers of Pandora, and his dream of finding a quiet area to settle down in where he could be alone with his science, was dependent of his survival skills, and thus, he trained. He trained every day, multiple times to strain his body to make it stronger. A strategy was devised on Earth for him by a team of experts who devised a new healing formula to accelerate his progress so that he could rest in at night ready for the next day. The ingredients, well, let's just say they were shockingly expensive and leave it at that. Luckily, he had shipped a significant amount with him, enough to last several years. A shaft of white light flickered in the corner of his eye, and he stopped exercising. He looked upwards and could see the glow of a ship entering the solar system like a new star in the night sky. The glow formed as the ships transitioned from near light speed to rapid deacceleration through thrusters to slot into a stable orbit around Pandora. Newcomers. Harry thought and smiled. Normally ships would only come once a year to drop off more staff and haul off the refined materials such as unobtainium funded the whole project. It would also be good to hear news about Earth. This far away, there was no direct communication, and ships had to take messages back and forth as technology had not cracked the faster-than-light communications of yet. That meant if he wanted to send a message back to Katie, she would have to wait for 5 years before hearing it, and then another 5 if she wanted to reply. The impracticality of it was one of the reasons why they had agreed to minimal contact. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding in. Finally, he had been waiting for their arrival for as long as he had been on Pandora. Unfortunately, his arrival had coincided with the arrival of the regular rotation of new crew and material delivery. Even if RDA was being as gracious as they could, that didn't extend to tying up their one landing pad with his supplies. He had unloaded his shuttle, which came with a prefab building that was under construction by some helpful hands to build his own lab. He had grown used to a certain quality of equipment and setup that even on this advanced base, he couldn't find. For the rest, including various drones of his own design that would be essential to automate much of his daily necessities, remained in orbit waiting for clearance. That would only come after several weeks or even months if the weather didn't cooperate to unload and load RDA's cargo hauler ship to capacity and send it off back to Earth. The next day, Harry was leaning against the building, munching on a blue-looking fruit in his hand that surprisingly tasted more like roasted carrots, while the shuttle unloaded the first batch of recruits for the mercenaries. "Look at all this fresh meat," one of the sergeants called out as the men marched neatly across the ground and into the building. Harry noticed a late departure roll down the ramp, using his wheelchair to narrowly avoid a collision with a mining truck. "That's just sad. Meals on wheels." Harry ignored the comment and gave the disabled man a nod of his head in greeting. The man's eyes hovered on his for a moment, probably the first blue person he had seen not on a screen. Whatever was going to happen next, Harry was sure it would at least be interesting. It was the week after when he finally met the disabled soldier again. Of course, this time, he was 9 foot tall, blue, and running across his planned basketball match with his bare ass hanging out of his hospital gown. A strange way to introduce yourself, but all agreed it was at least memorable. Jake Sully, later on, the stranger introduced himself when he finally put some pants on. Harry Moore. Nice to meet you. I hope you're settling in well." Jake looked around and Harry could still see the wonder reflected in his eyes that he also felt. "It's just so." He struggled for the words. "Majestic?" Harry offered and Jake nodded. "But it's more than that. It's like I was living a dream and only now I'm finally awake. To be able to walk, run, jump, it's more than a dream come true." Harry smiled. They talked together for several hours and Harry gave him the tour of the Avatar facilities and training ground. "And they lock us up at night? What do they think we're going to steal the Avatar bodies?" Jake laughed, but Harry just smiled. "You need to remember, when you disconnected from your Avatar body, it will keep its autonomic function, such as breathing. However, you're as feeble as a kitten and just as vulnerable. Anything or anyone could kill you while the body rests and you wouldn't even wake up." They walked together to the hut where the rest of the avatars were preparing for bed. Jake took a step in but stopped when his new friend didn't follow. "I thought you said all the avatars stay here?" Jake questioned. "They do. Unfortunately, I'm not an avatar." What do you mean you're not an avatar?" Jake sutured out, looking at the imposing blue figure with the clear signs of an avatar, the 5 fingers. Harry paused and thought about how to explain. He had tried several ways, but still hadn't worked out the best ways yet. "I'm a different sort of avatar." At Jake's puzzled expression, he expanded. "This is my one and only body. I was human and now I am this. Call me Navi, Avatar, it doesn't really matter. This is who I am now." Jake tried to question him further, but the managers who were starting to lock up and push him towards the empty bunk. "See me in the morning, I don't mind beating you on the obstacle course." "I've gotten fed up with Willow's mockery," Harry shouted out and then turned and walked away. The next day, he and Jake Sully had a further talk and soon, they were quick friends. And yes, they did race on the obstacle courses, and yes, Harry still lost. At least his lab would be ready soon to take his mind away from his repeated and very public defeat to the newbie that the rest of the avatars took great pleasure in rubbing in his face, or pasting the video on every holo tablet. He really had the worst friends. 2 months later. Harry pushed his way through the thick jungle. The machetes of the security cleaved up and down on the vines blocking their path, forcing a path through. Harry heard an animal twitter behind him. He jumped and turned, hand reaching for his sidearm. Seeing the Prolomurus, a 4-armed monkey, swing through the trees, he relaxed. A trip in Pandora's jungle, however boring it sounds to collect some samples, was never dull. Harry had finally gained enough mastery over his new body and impressed his instructors enough to squeeze himself onto the routine research expedition. They were only going into the surrounding forest of the base, where the greatest dangers had been regularly purged by the patrols, to collect some samples for a study of their potential medical properties. Apparently, some satellite imagery showed an area of interest close by that they want to check out. As he moved along behind the team, his hand gripped the portable scanner brought with him. It was at least 2 generations superior to the tech most of the scientists had available here, capable of scanning many details and secretions of plants without needing cuttings. He saw a great conical plant with an almost orange glow to one side of the path. He approached and started scanning. He was able to remotely record the cell's DNA and organelle structure to better understand the components. With that data, his lab, which was now functioning, could complete virtual experiments to determine the likelihood of finding a use for the plant, such as in making medicine. As his scanner got close enough, a slight breeze made the plant contact his instrument. Suddenly, the plant shrunk back. Almost disappeared except for a small protrusion a few inches from the soil. Recovering from the shock and triple-checking no immediate danger, Harry approached again and started scanning the shrunken form. Fascinating, he whispered to himself, seeing the preliminary results. Found something, tourist? That was what they called Harry, apparently. After another attempt to look at Grace's research, she had vented quite publicly about him, and now his nickname, or call sign as the military personnel liked to call it, was a tourist. Harry waved the scientist, Sean, over. He ran the expedition, and staying on his good side was the key to being invited back out. He had quickly realized that his dream of finding a peaceful and safe heaven was far until he could really understand Pandora. Look at the structure, Harry indicated to the other plants nearby. It's capable of incredible compression with an efficiency that even we struggle to match. Sean hummed back. Nothing too special, quite a common plant. A good defense mechanism for most animals, although I have heard the ostropede picks them out of the ground and eats them whole. But look at these results. He tilted his holotable to show him the results. The cell structure has changed. The cell walls have these organelles that I thought was something to do with the photosynthesis cycle. However, now I can see they literally folded the cell to compress it down. This is unheard of. If that's all it takes to. You're missing the point. Common or not, this is the sort of discovery that can be applied to many disciplines. From compressing data, manufacturing, or even storage. Imagine being able to compress items down without losing any of their structure or rigidity, perfect for space travel. You really think all that can come from one plant? Sean didn't look convinced. He was focused on the plants that were rare, that had miraculous properties to regrow limbs, cure exotic diseases, or even stop aging. A shrinking plant was beneath his notice. All things have value. Don't underestimate anything. Or you may just miss the gold mine under your very feet. Harry turned and continued scanning. The data would be a fantastic start to discovering some of Pandora's secrets. After some time, the team arrived at the destination. It was a small grove protected by overhanging trees and a rock face jutting out on one side. In the center lay a plant that looked deceptively simple, as if it was any common vine that they had seen 1,000 times in this jungle or on Earth. What made it special, however, was the fruit. Glowing purple with flakes of golden light within screamed its rarity and therefore value. The natives call it the traviari. We only heard about it by accident. It's one of their sacred plants that is rarely seen outside of the tribe. One of the Avatar researchers chipped in, equally shocked by the discovery. Harry approached and, trying not to get in the group's way, began scanning. Why is it so special? He asked, equal part curiosity and excitement to find out the answers himself. They shared a look, and at a nod from Sean explained. That right there is a miracle fruit. Eat that, and it can heal almost anything. Of course, if we process it back in the lab, we can get far better results and not be as wasteful. We've only come across 2 before. Harry thought to himself how useful it would have been to have that before all this, but the logistics of shipping it back presented its own challenges. And even then, he doubted the board members would make public their discovery. Thought better to keep it for themselves, even if they weren't foolish enough to value money over life, or at least their own life. The team took several samples of the soil and vine before harvesting. Red Falcon, do you copy? Sean radioed back to the ground team with our rotorcraft. We copy. Target found. Prepare for exfil. Lock onto coordinates for pickup. Roger. Roger. Exfil ready on your mark. Mark. Sean sent back. We're not walking back? Harry asked one of the other avatars in the group. He had been told that the rotorcraft struggled in the jungle environment, and therefore they always had to land and be picked up in more sparse areas. Nah, this thing here is worth the risk. And walking through the jungle with a few $100 million in our bags wouldn't feel right. It wasn't long before they could hear the craft in the distance approaching. Sean moved his team. All right, we have one chance. Don't screw it up. Cut 2 centimeters above the stem. Rye, you're on the vine. Uncover the roots. I want it back at base in one piece. Tourist, keep your eyes peeled. Once cut, these fruits seem to have a lure on the local wildlife. Wouldn't want you to become beast shit just yet. Harry, only now understanding the risk and the need for the immediate evacuation after extracting the plant, drew his sidearm. He had some training on using it and was accurate enough in the drills, but wasn't hopeful that translated to real-life survivability. Routine mission, my ass. Harry thought bitterly. All was going well. Too well. The fruit had been harvested and stored in a special cryo case to keep it fresh, and Rye was carefully uncovering the roots. The rotorcraft was circling above, waiting for their signal to drop the rope ladder to pull them to safety. Then they heard it. It started as nothing. Silence. The unnatural absence of sound in a forest that was filled with life put them all on edge. Then a low growl. Menacing and absolutely terrifying. The 2 military escorts that come with swung their guns around wildly, trying to find the source of the noise. A black shadow jumped over the avatars' heads and landed behind one of the guards. A quick snap with razor-sharp teeth severed his head, leaving his corpse to flop, the group quickly creating its own bloody pool. Thanator. It was one of the beasts that were in almost every Pandora training video. It was wickedly fast and dangerous. One of the apex predators of the jungle that even fully armed military units would take a detour for. Its body might not have the armor of some other beasts, but its hide was thick enough that all but a shot to the eyes with Harry's sidearm would be useless. Think. Harry forced his mind to work. How did they say to deal with one? Scatter. Reach the clearing, Sean shouted, and was the first to run into the bush. Harry made the mistake of making eye contact with the beast before running in a different direction. Behind him, he could hear bullets firing. The escort's last stand. The bullets soon stopped, and all was unnaturally quiet once again. He pushed his way through the jungle, not bothering to push aside the vines that whipped at his face. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A black shadow jumped from branch to branch parallel to him. Shit. It was following him. He could see its face poking out of the tree slightly ahead on his right. He could see its muscles flexing to leap and take his life. With a thought, acting solely on instincts Harry didn't know he had, Harry rolled to the side. The Thanator's claws just scraped along one of his arms, but he avoided the worst. He kept running. The clearing was not far. Hearing the growl behind him, he did the only thing to save his life yet again. He fell to the ground. This time the razor claws soared over his head. Now he had a new problem. The Thanator was blocking his path. He could run back, but he knew it would be futile. His only hope of safety was the rotorcraft and escape from here. Going deeper into the jungle would only give the beast a greater advantage. Resigning himself to a final contest, to risk it all, Harry drew a pistol. It was a beautiful piece that had been custom-made for his avatar form on Earth. It was made of the finest materials, and its round could pack much more of a punch than the typical pistol. However, he still knew it wouldn't be enough. He would get one shot. Maybe two. Then the beast would be on him. A critical strike. A vulnerability was his only chance. The eyes would be perfect, however far too small for him to hit. He was hardly a marksman with his weeks of training. Looking at the Thanator now, he could see it had 2 strange types of gills on either side of its neck. They were a common feature of many of Pandora's wildlife and were how they breathed. Without double-guessing his decision, he fired. Once. Twice. The Thanator was approaching now. A giant leap. Harry thought himself to the side, avoiding the Thanator's angry bite, however roughly landing on a tree, sending a painful shock up his arm. Broken. He knew that pain. He raised his one good arm and prepared to fire again. Bang! A loud shot echoed between the trees. A group of men dressed in camo clothes emerged from the trees. Behind them, a mech followed holding his rifle and began directing fire at the beast. Taking a final look at the prey that escaped it, it slipped back into the jungle. As it did, Harry noticed that it limped ever so slightly. Perhaps I did hit it after all? Harry thought. The journey back was filled with mixed feelings. They had survived a Venator attack. Something not many people could claim. Well, except for those two escorts. Their bodies were found ripped to shreds in the jungle. On the other hand, they had lost the fruit. Their rescuers had quickly advanced through the jungle to where it was left. Unfortunately, the case was open and a feathered arrow was left behind. The Navi. Harry pulled out his holo tablet. The glass was smashed, but he could replace that easily enough. The data, however, that was the real gold mine. He had scanned dozens of plants, including the miracle fruit, and was looking forward to the discoveries he could draw from them. As he landed, his arm in a sling, until the medical unit could repair the bone, Harry looked around and came to a decision. He needed more training. He needed more skills. He needed to do more than survive in this place. He needed to thrive. Left, right, duck, roll, climb, take aim, shoot, repeat. Harry had stepped up his training regiment, taking some tips from Jake Sully on how to better survive on Pandora. His body was getting stronger. The blue muscles on his arms and legs rippled under his loose clothing, a sign that his hard work was paying off. Pure muscles, however, were not enough. He had to gain skills. How to light fires, hunt food, move through the jungle, make shelter, and use a variety of weapons. His pistol had been little use in his confrontation with the Venator, and so he needed to become familiar and effective with larger, more powerful weapons that could put down the hardy wildlife of Pandora. It had been several weeks since the attack, but it still filled his mind. He had given everything to be here, to have a second chance at life. He was not going to give that up. For anyone or anything. The scars from the beast now wear white lines marring his arm. They had the technology to fix them, of course. However, he found himself agreeing with the irritating colonel. They were reminders that Pandora deserved his respect. He was getting ready for another run of the course he had been creating for himself when a friendly voice called out. "Hey, Harry, I've been looking for you." "Sorry, man. I've been training so much I must have missed our lunch." Jake Sully smiled at his friend. At least he was putting away all that scientific nonsense and starting to act like a proper recruit. He had been shocked by the lack of training the Avatar drivers took in their new form. Grace had given them new bodies, but neglected to train them to survive the rigors of Pandora's jungle. All the protests and suggestions for more than the mandatory survival training, which included little more than how to light a fire, was rejected. Jake was sure there were Boy Scouts with more survival training than these billion-dollar avatars. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, looking at the base and beyond into the green ocean of endless forests. The Marine eventually broke the silence. "You know, you never did explain how you came to be stuck in an avatar's body." "Huh. There's not much to tell." "I disagree. You wouldn't believe the amount of base gossip about you. The avatar that's not quite an avatar." "And what are they saying?" "They know you don't have a human body to go back into." "Why is anyone's guess. But what they're sure of is you must have been rich. As in megacorp rich." "Really? And what do you think? That you came here for a second chance? An opportunity to remake yourself?" Harry smiled at his friend. "I suppose." He paused and then finally relented. It wasn't like the story was classified. He was sure enough when news came with the next supply ship, it would all be public anyway. "I was dying. A rare disease that even the best medicine, the best doctors couldn't fix. So I took a gamble." "The Avatar Project?" Harry nodded. "I read an article about how drivers such as yourself create these secondary bodies to explore Pandora and interact with the natives. After that, the technology to transfer to my consciousness permanently was the easy part. And why here? That couldn't have been cheap, and I don't see the RDA giving avatars to just anyone. I guess the rumors are right. I was wealthy." Jake took that in for a moment before broaching a topic he knew that hundreds on the base had wanted to find out. "You know, there's talk you brought enough supplies to start your own colony." Harry let out a good chuckle. "Hardly. I brought a few essentials with me. It's still mostly in orbit, but when the loading is complete, I can call it down to help me find a quiet corner of this planet to call my own. Jake just shook his head. The wealth and privilege of his friend had gone far beyond his wildest dream. They were from the same planet, but completely different worlds. If you were that rich, how come I don't recognize your name? Well, I suppose our introduction was a little rushed. The whole bare-ass incident. Yeah. Let me try again. Nice to meet you. I was formally called Harry. Harry Moore. More, Jake said the word slowly as if tasting it. More, as in Moore Corp? Jake couldn't help but drop his jaw as his eyes went wide with realization. I was never very involved in the business side. More of the scientist behind the scenes. But I suppose the vanity of naming the company after myself is something even I couldn't escape from. Jake pestered Harry with questions for the next hour, not willing to leave out any detail about his previous life and how he ended up here. Later that day, when the sun had passed over the horizon and the night crept in, Harry stood in his lab staring at the screen, daring it to correct his pronunciation again. Beep. Incorrect. Please try again. The computer bleated out in its unfeeling tone. Fuck. Harry could help but swear. He had tried to learn the Navi language for the last month. Every night he would spend several hours repeating the phrases over and over, but his progress seemed minuscule. He started to have regrets of asking Katie to build a program for him. Perhaps it would have been better to invent some sort of universal translator. That would have saved him many headaches. Beep. Ink. The computer started to say again. Stop, he commanded. Repeat the phase. Beep. Ol Gotti Cammy, I see you. Harry took a deep breath and tried to match the tone of the recoding. Oln gate camera. Beep. Incorrect. Please try again. Again and again. Harry echoed the machine until he finally heard the ping. Correct, that meant he had gotten close enough. He had learned most of the common names for objects and animals and could comfortably point to something and say what it is in Navi, however sentences were beyond him. The Navi grammatical structure made his days of trying to learn Latin seem downright logical. Harry had changed his research approach due to lacking the freedom to go on research teams. Somehow being on a team where 2 security forces get eaten is seen as something of a black mark when it comes to accompanying other research teams. Instead, he focused on wildlife that existed in the base, although that was severely limited. He had also taken to exploring the immediate area around the base. Despite the great roads carved through the forest canopy, there was still a diversity of life all around. He was able to pull lots of samples from plants and animals in the local area to enrich his growing database. The security forces had started to hate him. They frequently had to purge the area of animals. It was one of the sources of the base's meat supply. However, Harry had been pinching their hunted prizes in the name of research. On the bright side, at least they hadn't shot him. Not yet anyway. Harry found himself on one of his mid-morning hikes to a hill just on the edge of the base. He tucked his equipment securely into his backpack before leaping upwards into the tree. He scrambled up, not particularly gracefully. Tree climbing was not a skill common on Earth, where wildlife and all natural areas were on the verge of extinction. Putting his arms out for balance, he shuffled along a branch. The nearby tree branches reached out as if to greet him. With a great leap, the blue form landed on the tree with surprising ease. His tail straightened out to counterbalance his motion. I suppose the obstacle course was helpful after all. He couldn't wait to back to Willow and Jake and rub it in their smug faces. He had seen videos of the natives, and the ease at which to move through the jungle had invited a fit of jealousy that Harry didn't know he possessed. That's why he was out here trying to jump from tree to tree to prove he wasn't any lesser. If they could do it, so could he. Or at least that was what he thought. With his confidence building, he quickly ran along the thick branch and leapt again. Landed. With barely a pause, he took off again, this time for a much wider gap. Using all his leg muscles, arching his back to swing his arms, he lunged into the open air. He soared through the air and couldn't help but let a smile form on his face. Now he understood. This was living. He could feel his heart thrum with joy. He felt alive. He felt at home. Harry arced his body on instinct and landed squarely on the new moss-covered tree. He straightened up to decide his next jump. Suddenly, he slipped. The moss under his avatar issue's shoes slipped on the moist moss, and he went over the side of the branch. Harry's arms failed about uselessly trying to find a hold, but grasped nothing in the open air he found himself in. A scream escaped from his throat. Not very manly, but long-ingrained habits died hard. He was able to flip himself around in the air just in time to be slapped in the face by a giant leaf. It bent under his weight, but couldn't hold him. Bang! 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 Harry fell from leaf to leaf, each time getting slapped over and over again. Luckily, all the collisions at least took the brunt of the fall. When Harry finally hit the ground, it was with a dull thud. He lay on the ground for a moment, not caring about the risk of being on the canopy floor, trying to catch his breath. He was winded but alive. Maybe I need a bit more practice, Harry muttered to himself. He suddenly didn't quite feel confident to share this experience with his friends just yet. Perhaps when he more practiced. He looked up at the trees and forced his tired body to move. Time to try again. The next day, Harry leaned on a fence on top of the base fence, a steaming cup of what passed for coffee in his hands. It was a dangerous and wild world, he thought to himself. But I love it. Jake and Norm were going on the first excursion today. They were led by the most experienced Avatar driver, Grace herself. Harry couldn't help a twinge of jealousy that Jake, a Marine, was given higher priority for the science mission than himself. He sighed. Such was the way of the world. He looked back toward the base where a rotorcraft was taking flight. He could recognize Jake's form even from this distance, holding a door gun in all his military garb. At least that will make him happy. As they flew over, he raised his mug in a silent salute. He hoped that whatever they found, it was at least less exciting than his travels beyond the base. And the last thing we see is this Marine's ass disappearing into the brush with this angry Venator chasing after him. Grace told the tale for the 4th or 5th time this night. Harry stood in the canteen, where all the Avatar drivers' human bodies gathered to learn more about Jake's great adventure. He was very noticeable, being blue, 9 foot tall and wearing a mask, but no one bothered him. All were focused on Jake. Jake had a miraculous encounter with the natives. He, instead of being killed for trespassing, which had become more common, was instead welcomed among the tribe. He would now learn how to be one of them, the Na'vi. The opportunities it created were extraordinary, not only for Selfridge's desire for unobtainium, but also for science. Grace and Harry's ongoing feud had been forgotten tonight, as both enjoyed the tales of a world they could not even dream about. You know, for reasons I cannot fathom, the Omaticea have chosen you. Jake just smiled his cocky grin. Hey, it's not something you can teach. Harry pipped up. What of the people? What are they like? I've only been there one evening. Most didn't seem pleased I was there, but they accepted me into their circle. There was this evening gathering. They all sat around a fire and passed around food and drink. Like a college bonfire, only more nudity and less drinking. The surrounding crowd laughed and Max, one of the Avatar engineers, shouted out, "That's awesome." After some time, Harry drifted off into the background. He could see something new in Jake. A purpose. He had found what he come to Pandora for, and he was happy for his friend. But that didn't fill the gaping hole in his heart. What was his purpose? After the excitement of Sully's news position died down, Harry was able to sweet-talk Selfridge to place him on another expedition. It was about time he got down to business. The loading of the starship was nearing completion. It wouldn't be long before he could unload his own cargo. He only needed a destination. A home base away from this mining camp. This time he was the only Avatar of the group. A larger rotorcraft that had a hangar below where 2 of the human mechs could be stored was sent out. It wasn't a scientific mission like his previous excursion, but more of a scouting of an unexplored area. He had been given a resonator that was able to detect unobtainium deposits, even buried underground. At least he could see a professional scouting mission. He could find out how they function, what they look for. He would need all of that when it came to his turn to find a base. They took off and landed in a clearing not far away. The human drivers of the mechs mounted up and the group advanced through the jungle. As they walked along, Harry noticed the plants here were different than he had scanned before. Almost as if they had walked into a different biome. The colorful plants gave way to soaring trees whose branches weaved pathways through the treetops. His scanning device in one hand, the reasoned on his back, he pushed forward. The great mech seemed to crush much of the wildlife and scare away what animals he could have found, much to Harry's great displeasure. However, knowing how his last trip went, he thought it better to stay on the good side of the giant machines carrying portable cannons. It was a good long trek through the forest. They looped around to maximize the field for the resonator to scan. When they preparing to head back, and Harry had filled his bags with samples, one of the escorts called out, "Navi!" The guards, well-trained, formed up with their weapons ready, scanning the area where a blue shadow had been perched. Knowing the situation could deteriorate quickly, he called out, "Hello, we mean no harm." He then mentally slapped himself. Very few of Navi attended Grace's school, and therefore not many learnt English. He corrected himself and called out a greeting. "Kaltsi. Garaloof Palmsrak. Hello, how are you?" The response was hissing. From behind a tree, he saw a flash of color and dodged the side. An arrow embedded in the ground where he was standing. He couldn't pull his eyes away from the arrow. The feathers were brightly colored, and looking closer, he could see a sticky liquid on the stone tip. Poison. He could almost hear the colonel's voice in his head. They are fond of arrows dipped in a neurotoxin that'll stop your heart in 1 minute. The escorts see the attack, prepared to return fire. "Stop," he called out. Surprisingly, it worked. The mercenaries didn't fire. He raised his hands to Navi. "Nimue, peace/calm." He repeated it again, almost begging. "Nimue." He heard some Navi he couldn't quite understand, but the word demon was clear to hear. There would be no peace today. Arrows flew and bullets returned in a fury. It was over soon. The natives had taken out a young Marine with an arrow to the heart. The Navi, the group of 6 that they found, had been wiped out. Harry fell to his knees one of the corpses. His head bowed in shame. It was a young man, barely of an age to be a hunter, and now he was dead. His journey ended. What for? Who benefited from this ceaseless death and destruction? He brushed a strand of hair away from the corpse's face and could only mutter his apologies as tears fell from his eyes. "Iwa Gaha, may Iwa be with you." He looked around the clearing where the Navi had been slain. He could see vine nets half filled with nuts from a nearby tree. This was no war party. They were gathering food from the jungle. He looked to mercenaries. He wasn't sure how to feel about them. They had killed these natives with ease. The superior numbers and firepower left little advantage for the Navi. He could see them laughing and smiling at each other, congratulating each other on a great hunt. He hated that. He hated them. But a part of him couldn't help but acknowledge they had probably saved his life. "Grab a shovel. We're going to bury them," Harry informed the party. "What?" They spluttered. "They killed John, and now you want to give them a burial? I suppose you'll be wanting a funeral service too." The mech moved its large metal limbs to point its fingers at Harry accusingly. Another chipped in. "Let the animals take them. They're barely adults who were gathering food. This didn't need to happen. We bury them." "I don't. I have spoken." The steel in his voice must have conveyed something to the surrounding men. They sighed and mumbled under their breath, but soon 6 graves were dug under the roots of a large tree. The bodies of the Navi were placed gently in by Harry himself, not trusting the others to be respectful. They pushed the soil to cover them. The rest turned away and saw to their own fallen while Harry hung back. The words came from deep inside him. "All energy is only borrowed, and one day you have give it back. Iwa Gahu. May Iwa be with you." As the rotorcraft took them away, he knew in his heart. He had to get away. This killing was beyond his capacity to endure. On his holotablet brought up the satellite images of Pandora. He soon found the mining camp located on the main continent. He used his fingers to zoom out, looking for somewhere far enough away to disappear in. His eyes caught a series of islands just off the coast. From the scans they looked rocky or barren, with very little vegetation covering the jutting rocks that seemed to push themselves out of the sea. A small group of trees grew at the center of the group of islands, but the rest was perfect. He could shape, mine, and change that place to suit his needs. He wouldn't have any issues with the tribes as there was nothing of value there for the Navi to protect. Just rocks. He looked at the map again and nodded to himself. That could be my new home. It's not possible, Selfridge screamed back at Harry, sitting in his office. His face was a mask of emotion to conceal the boiling rage that now lived inside him. You will facilitate the cargo delivery to this site. That was the argument you made when I first came here. The argument was to set up your equipment near the mining camp. Not hundreds of clicks away. I choose where I am going to live on this planet. Your shuttle will land the supplies there. What happens after is none of your business. If you think that you can. Harry cut him off with a barely contained snarl. Think. I can. If you want to challenge my authority on this, remember my human body may have died on Earth, but those connections, that wealth still opens doors. Even in the RDA. The threat from his words were clear, even more so from the vicious tone. Selfridge sank back to his chair in defeat. He was a company director, not a soldier. There was only so much he could do in front of a giant blue alien. Why? He finally asked. Why no? He had worked hard to accept Harry into the fold of the base, giving him every privilege he could, in an attempt to get him to stay. If Harry constructed his base in tangent with him, their operations could have accelerated beyond just mining. Harry could help but let a hiss of anger. His lips pulled back over his front teeth in a warning. Why? He repeated incredulously. Your operation is in direct conflict with the natives. Instead of trying to solve it, you send your mercenaries in to clean it up. What do you think they all carry guns because it helps the diplomacy? Harry took a deep breath before continuing. I watched the slaughter of innocents whose only crime was trying to defend their land. And you ask me why? I can no longer tolerate this place. To me, it reeks of blood that is never going to wash off. He pointed a finger at the small human. That is your legacy. Blood. Storming out of the office, Harry made his way back to his lab. Thankfully, he was the only one with access. None of those pesky interruptions. He pulled up an image of the island. His island. One of the first things he had done after returning was to send out a scouting drone to record some accurate scans of the island and surrounding area. He would hardly want to make his home an island that would sink below the ocean in a storm. The scan results were promising. The island stood tall out of the water, where peaks of rock poked through the water that would make it the worst place for boating. From the scans he could see the smaller islands scattered around the main island. The ones further out to sea seemed to act as a natural sea defense that absorbed the worst of the waves, leaving a safer, almost lagoon inside. Years of erosion had gotten rid of the soft soils, leaving only the hard rock behind, but that was fine with Harry. One of the first payloads to be delivered was his construction drones. They were rarely used on Earth due to various legalities that limited their activity to protect human jobs, but here on Pandora, he was free to maximize their use. All he needed to do was direct them to cut out, shape, and then build his base. Then, with the materials, he could locally source his dream would become reality. The mining base had an excess of other metals from the mining. They were not worth the price of shipping back to Earth and therefore sat unwanted in a warehouse. Harry felt no qualms about liberating that supply for his own gain. With a practiced swipe of his fingers, he brought up the designs. Katie had experts create multiple designs he could use that would meet all of his needs. Looking at them now, however, they were lacking. His mind thought back to those young Na'vi who was now decomposing in the forest. Their family never to know their fate. All of the designs were very. Harry paused, unsure how to describe them, but finally settled on a word that he was becoming increasingly distasteful of. Human. He had no desire to pollute this world with more human structures. He looked back at the island and made a decision. The scientific building, the crop cultivators, the desalination plant, energy production, and more could all be built within the island. Underground. That would leave the surface to be made in a more native style where he could coexist with the local plants. He selected the giant trees on the island and removed the smaller undergrowth from his display. He brought up the myriad designs of buildings and images of Na'vi tribes. He would make the structure flow around the environment, not cover it up. It was time to create something worthy of this world. Worthy of the fallen. Worthy of Iowa. The shuttle could be seen on the horizon, moving fast like a shooting star entering the atmosphere. It was the first haul of his cargo since his arrival on Pandora, and it was dropping it far away from him on the island he had claimed. Inside were many of the automated drones that had earned him his fortune and reputation. They would be able to tunnel deep within the ground, both on land and in the sea, to not only make room for the spaces he would require to be self-sufficient, but also to find deposits of metals or materials they could extract. Just because he had a growing affection for the natives didn't mean he would settle for discarding all his technology. Soon, he told himself. Once the cargo had been dropped, the signal would be sent to the lab where he start to control and direct their efforts. He had finally managed to complete his design. It was what many would describe as ridiculous to create so many facilities and functions that would help him do everything from grow his own food, recycle waste, manufacture equipment, train his growing physical skills, and most importantly, continue his research. Much of the island would be hollowed out, and even including some of the small islands to make room for all of this, but he knew it would be worth it. The other advantage, apart from sparing the environment, was that during a storm, he could be perfectly comfortable, remaining confident that the water wouldn't be able to penetrate meters of thick rock covered with reinforced concrete and metal walls. He would finally be able to leave this horror show for a peaceful retirement. Harry only felt sorry for the few good people remaining. They lacked his means to claw out his own path. His mind turned to Jake. They had hardly spoken recently. He had been so wrapped up in sorting his departure out while Jake was driving his avatar all day, every day, in the Navi tribe. He looked at the sky starting to darken and decided he needed to say goodbye to the few friends he had made here. With purposeful strides, he walked over to Avatar's canteen. He pulled out his mask and placed it on. Luckily, he didn't have to wait long. He was already getting strange looks from many of the other members about someone in the canteen when they can't eat because they would have to take the mask off. Jake. Harry called out and invited his friend over. They sat in quiet for a while. Jake shoveled food into his mouth. He looked terrible. Purple circles ringed his eyes and his skin was pale and almost translucent. What was before an average build had deteriorated to skin and bones with weeks of no action. "How's the tribe life treating you?" Harry asked to try and break the ice. Sully nodded several times. "I learn more every day. The way they see this world, everything is connected. It's fascinating in a way that most people just can't understand. Neytiri has been teaching me to hunt with a bow. I still haven't quite got it, but every day I get better. Every day my feet get tougher, I can run further. You haven't seen the jungle until you've seen it the Navi way. You don't wear your boots?" Harry asked, mildly surprised. It was a small detail, but not something he had thought of. He had worn shoes all his life, so did all the other Avatar drivers. He looked down at his own shoes and wondered if perhaps his agility would improve without them. Jake dodged the question with one of his own. "What about you? I heard something handed on patrol and now you always seem locked up in your lab. You knew this was never my final destination. I have wanted to explore this world since the first moment I landed here." "So you're leaving?" "Just like that." "Yes," Harry said. It was harsh, but it was true. He had to get away from this place. "I'm setting up a home on an island a few hundred clicks away. Just off the coast. No big monsters or natives to hunt me down. It will be me and my research. Exactly what I wanted when I came here." Harry didn't want to explain what had happened. Jake already was stuck in the middle of the conflict. To put those deaths on his conscience as well would just be cruel. "But what about?" Jake waved his hands to indicate all the people. "I will miss it. Strangely. I will miss my friends and the work I've done here, but we all must move on eventually." Jake looked at him sadly. What Harry was planning was little better than self-imposed exile. Harry continued, "Still, you and the others are always welcome to visit. Just make sure to wipe your feet on the way in." They both had a good chuckle at that. The two friends sat talking, telling each other of their adventures and trials, of discoveries and failures, until the sun had gone and the night had settled in. Saying goodbye was never easy, but at least Harry hoped it wouldn't be forever. A month later, Harry was soaring over the jungle. His own private plane. It came down from orbit in parts and was assembled by the handful of drones and workers at the mining base. Designed to be piloted by a full-sized avatar, with the assistance of the computer, he was able to transport himself, as well as several cargo crates full of materials needed for his base construction. The jungle became a blur in the windows, with the green giving way to more green. The endless forest was only broken up by the colorful plants that dotted the landscape. Occasional trees far larger than all their peers rose out of the ground, making him and the surrounding wildlife dodge around in gentle arcs. Flying through the air, Harry had to constantly remind himself. He wasn't the largest or scariest thing occupying the air. He had heard tales of the great Leonopteryx, a winged beast that rivaled the space shuttle for size and with all the razor claws to kill just about anything on Pandora. It was the apex predator. Harry hoped he wouldn't run into one. The journey was long. He had been traveling for 2 days already and hoped to reach the island by sundown. Flying at night was interesting. The beasts, the truly dangerous beasts, seemed to come out from whatever hole they were hiding when the sun went down. Banshees were particularly annoying. He had heard from Jake how he would have to tame one of those flying death traps to officially become a hunter. He wasn't quite sure, never having made the Tsahelu, the bond, how it all worked, but thought that was a topic best left to be researched for another time. Luckily, he had thought ahead. His plane was more heavily armed than the regular rotorcraft the mercenaries used. Automated machine gun turrets were positioned around his craft to provide a powerful deterrent to any wildlife that decided to take a closer interest in him. He stood in the cockpit silently watching the curvature of the planet. He'd wrestled with his decision to leave for too long. Saying goodbye to the friends he had made was hard, but ultimately, he felt free. He was free. A change in the distance caught his eye. His hand instinctively went to the weapons panel, ready to arm the guns at a moment's notice. At the horizon line, it was no longer green. It was blue. The deep royal blue and turquoise of Pandora's oceans. A nearly unexplored region that humanity had yet to threaten. A smile crept slow on his face. He was nearly there. A boyish excitement bubbled up in him, waiting to see his new home. To explore. To relish in the joy of creating rather than destroying. Home, he whispered almost as a prayer to himself. The island was bare. Drones in their resplendent yellow paint crawled over much of the island, carrying resources or tunneling down. While the island was large, much of the topography left little to be desired. He had created an ambitious plan to reshape much of the landscape of the island and even the ocean floor to create more ideal conditions. That would allow him opportunities to properly cultivate the land or even form artificial rock pools for fishing. Already, drones were unloading his plane with great efficiency, where they would be able to use the supplies of materials and methods to start the true construction. As initially decided, much of the island's vegetation was to be kept, such as the tall trees that he would build around. The great amount of material that had been extracted from underground was being used to level off some of the island territories to help build a flat landing pad for future deliveries or plane landings. Due to the amount, it was also being formed into great blocks that would form the basis of an underwater defense system to block rogue waves, as well as keep large predators out of the shallow water surrounding his new home. Despite having a heavy hand in inventing and programming many of the machines he was now relying on to build his home, it still amazed him. He smiled thinking about how people 100 or even 50 years ago would react to the rate of technological development. Even on Earth now, there were only a few who could enjoy this luxury. His thoughts turned to his accommodations. He knew it wouldn't be ready yet, with many of the necessary materials only delivered now. Luckily, he had brought a prefab building that would serve as a temporary shelter, but it was little better than a tent with a solar. Not what he wanted to spend the rest of his long life in. The construction would take months to finish. The digging and frame of the base would be done in a matter of days. However, the actual construction was far more complicated. He needed to equip his structures with all the modern conveniences, modern plumbing, electrical outputs, etc. He needed to unpack his equipment shipped all the way from Earth. Set up the automated systems, and many more tasks. All of that would require specialist work that even the most advanced drones struggled with. He was looking at a timeline of a week or two to get his basic accommodation complete, then several more weeks until his lab was set up. The rest would follow in the preceding months, but he had at least shipped enough supplies to last him until he was up and running. Harry walked over to his new home, taking in the amazing view from the tallest hill. On the horizon, he could see the coastline of the mainland. However, it was far enough away that he didn't need to be worried about attacks from there. And naturally, being on land gave him excellent protection against the undoubted hidden dangers laying in wait within the water. He brought the hollow tablet up and scanned the landscape into his planning program. He had to construct several defenses. He was alone and didn't have the luxury of an army of mercenaries to defend his home. He needed different options. Katie had supplied him with a variety of solutions that had been used both on Earth and on other planetary expeditions. There were, of course, the turrets. They could shoot approaching enemies out of the sky with great accuracy, however often lacked flexibility as they were tied to one spot. Still, he would construct a few with good vantage points. Better safe than sorry wasn't a common motto for nothing. In addition, there were other more non-violent methods. There were sound emitters that produced sounds that humans and Navi couldn't detect but would irritate the local wildlife into leaving his home well enough alone. Similarly, there were sonar cannons that could work underwater to discourage large predators from coming near. However, the most important was his defenses and early warning system. All his buildings would be connected to his underground base to provide refuge if an attack took place. They would be heavily reinforced with refined metals to provide the ultimate protection. After his near-death experiences, safety was a heavy burden on Harry's mind that all of this preparation would hopefully be able to soothe. Safe, it seemed, was a high bar to pass in Pandora. Walking to a natural bay on the island, Harry removed his shoes, a more common occurrence after his talk with Jake, and dipped his feet in the crystal-clear water. Wading in deeper to sit on a rock with feet dangling in the water, he was amazed by all the sea life he could see just from the shore. Scores of colorful fish swam around the bay, often ducking and hiding in the undersea plants. Further out, Harry could see the shimmer of a great reef that would have put what remained of Australia to great shame. With the thrill and recklessness of one finally free, he stripped off his clothes and dived into the water. The sensation was different than he expected. In his human days, he had the luxury of swimming many times, despite the startling lack of clean water. But now, it was different. He felt in control. Powerful. He moved his arms and passed a swarm of bright yellow fish that seemed to give him sideways glances before giving him a wide berth. Pushing through great fronds of myriad seaweeds, he couldn't help but think of all the samples he would be able to find here. The underwater world of Pandora was largely unexplored. Any efforts were stopped when the U-botanum was found on land so the company could focus on its extraction. He continued deeper towards the reef. Somehow, his breath still wasn't depleted. His eyes not needing the goggles he feared, he would to see the marvels of the underwater world. He heard a sound and turned to see one of his crab drones trample the plants as they started to cut and shape the ocean floor. That will need to change, Harry thought to himself, making a mental note to alter the program directives. The ocean was more alive than he had ever expected, and it deserved to be protected as much as possible. He wouldn't stop his plans, but rather make sure to minimize underwater damage. Looking at a strange glowing plant with tendrils sticking out, he reached his hand out to give it a gentle touch. The plant quickly reacted by changing the colors, going first from blue to green and then to orange. The lights were so mesmerizing that he almost missed the electrical shock the plant gave him. If he was a fish, it would have stunned, if not killed him. As a Navi, it did little more than make his arm tingle. In Harry's mind, he likened it to the sensation of licking a battery, a very large battery. Another swooshing sound triggered his sensitive hearing. He turned around again, half expecting to see another crab drone. It was not. A dark shadow moved quickly through the water in the reef ahead. It was only then that his recklessness hit him. He was out in the water. No weapons. No base defenses to return to. Taking the only option available to him, he started swimming back to shore with all his strength. He could hear motion behind him but kept swimming. Avatar's bodies might not rival a fish's pure speed, but they were fast. As he could finally put his feet on the ground again near the shore, he turned. Finally willing to find what had nearly given him a heart attack. An illu poked its head out of the water, looked at him innocently and chirped before diving back into the water. Harry let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Ilus were often found in shallow water and fed off the local fish and vegetation, but didn't often venture far out as they were easy prey for other aquatic wildlife. It was a good sign. If there were more dangerous predators nearby, the Ilu would have fled long ago. Now reassured, he looked back at the water, lapping around his ankles, inviting him back in. Harry was tempted to return, to continue his underwater exploration, but resisted. His scare with the Ilu was a good reminder to him. He needed to at least be armed before returning. Walking up the hill to where the construction was centered, and where his temporary accommodation now lay, he paused and rested on a patch of moss. Even with the sun still in the sky, he could see the looming gas giant of Polyphemus. Despite just being a moon, Pandora still rivaled Earth for size, but could only be one of several moons that orbited the gas giant that was commonly featured in the sky. The swirls of colors on the distant planet were simply beautiful. Now dried off, he came back to his home. His list of jobs to be done was only extending. The workload was immense. The pressure to survive is all-encompassing. But as Harry busied himself, he started to hum a popular Earth tune, as content as he could be. He had found his home. Now he just needed to add the finishing touches. Beep, beep. Harry groaned. He was starting to regret setting up his communication hub. The mining base wouldn't leave him alone. That annoying fool Selfridge was constantly asking him for his data, scouting reports, and such. It was like he expected Harry to show him a map with a big X marked where the super-secret stash of unobtainium was. He had responded. To at least let his friends know he was still alive. It was along the lines of, "I'm alive. Stop bugging me." He had been living on the island for nearly a month now. His accommodation and lab were all set up. The drones still had plenty of work ahead of them. While one project was completed, Harry was gifted in finding two more for them to complete. His latest ambition was to create a system of farming certain seafood in his local bay, the Pandora version of mussels and clams. His diet of meal packets was starting to drive him slowly insane, and any chance to supplement his diet was now a high priority. From the samples he had been taking from the local plants, he had found a variety that were edible. Sadly, only a handful passed his taste requirement. He hoped to try his hand at underwater cultivation of those that he did enjoy, ensuring a long-lasting supply. He had already taken the first steps on land to start a farm. He had a cleared area on the surface where had painstakingly transported fertile soil from the mainland to be his base. The different seeds he had acquired at the base now were used to sow his fields. He had also cleared a large area underground that he had converted into a hydroponic bay. He was able to grow many of the more delicate plants in perfectly controlled conditions to maximize his crop yield. Unfortunately, as with many crops, he couldn't expect any fast results. Some of the fruit trees he planted wouldn't bear fruit for several years. What he could eat more immediately, though, was the fish. A high-carbon steel fishing rod, probably far too over-engineered, flicked out in his hand to cast the bait in a deeper part of the bay. Tug, 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 yank. Harry pulled the rod back hard and started to reel in. The fish fought him, trying to escape back into open water. The wire pulled him closer and closer until Harry could scoop him up in a net safely from the shore. It was a large catch today, easily over 10 kilograms, and would probably break several records for fishing back on Earth. Harry hauled the fish up and kissed its slimy skin. It had taken a while and several days of not catching anything before he got the knack for it. Now he normally went fishing at least once every other day, with the meat being a welcome supplement to what would have been a very bland meal. With now practiced ease, he placed the fish on the makeshift table he had constructed at the shoreside, drew his knife, and began to cut and clean the fish. It was a process he hadn't been familiar with, but a large digital library of tutorials came in handy. Now he could gut and fillet a fish like a pro chef. He picked up the guts and threw them into the water. Several large crab-type creatures quickly scurried across and devoured them, as had become their habit. If he hadn't already confirmed they weren't a threat and also weren't edible, he would have taken offense at their complete disregard of his presence. Chirp. The Illo stuck its head out, calling out to him. Again. No. Go away. I told you last time, no more. Chirp. The Illo called out again. its little face looking hopefully into his eyes. Harry grumbled something and used his knife to cut a fillet of the fish, making sure to reserve the juiciest cut for himself. Walking to the shore, he tossed the fish to the Ilu, who leapt into the air and caught it. With a single gulp, it swallowed and returned looking at him expectantly. "Chirp," it asked again. Harry looked incredulously at the sheer greed of this creature. It had bothered him every time he had fished. At first, he ignored it, only for it to retaliate by pulling the fish off his hook before it could be reeled in. It all seemed a big game to Ilu, who only backed off if given a tribute of his catch. He looked at the large fish and sighed. He wouldn't be able to finish it, and he preferred not to waste anything. He went back and cut another flank before sending it the Ilu's way. "And that's the last bit. You hear me?" he called out after it had ducked away. At this point, he wasn't sure that either of them believed it any longer. Taking his meal, he discarded the bones and leftover trimming in the ocean for the animals to pick through. His house circled the central tree on the island with great glass windows circling the outside. He walked inside, grabbing a nearby hanging towel to wipe his feet before proceeding to the kitchen. It was a simple setup, but he had taken a certain pleasure in forging an avatar-size frying pan and utensils. He placed this fish on the side, ready to be eaten later in the day. Looking around his house, the structure was complete, but it wasn't quite finished yet. It lacked the fittings and clutter of a normal house. For many of the items, such as a table and chairs, he would need to make a trip to the mainland to source some wood. For the rest, it was a low priority on his limited manufacturing capability, where many more vital components were taking up the available resources. He opened a security door using his fingerprints and proceeded down a step of stairs to reach his lab. He deposited the samples he had collected on the side and started to set up his equipment. Even with his skills in automation, some things just needed to be done by hand. He put each of the new samples in separate testing tubes before placing them into his large scanner. It would be able to perform most of the tests independently of him and automatically record the results in his database. It was starting to become a challenge, though. The data grew at a far faster rate than he could examine it, causing a serious backlog in his research. After several hours of working in the lab, a delicious meal of fresh fish, and a relaxing nap in the sun, Harry was restless. He hadn't left the island for several weeks, being so busy with the construction, however, now had some free time to explore the surrounding area. He moved to his plane, where he set off towards the coastline. It was a short flight of only 15 minutes, however the wind made keeping the ride steady a challenge. After finding a landing site not too far away from the beach, Harry advanced into the jungle again. Yet this time, he was alone. In one hand, he held a rifle that had enough force to penetrate a tank. Strapped to his leg were 2 razor-sharp knives. On his other, a scanning device was strapped to his wrist, providing a thermal image of the wildlife around him. Any signs of large creatures, such as thanators, would trigger an alarm, and Harry would be able to retreat, hopefully without conflict. Climbing a tree to navigate the jungle from high up, copying what he assumed the Navi would do, his bare feet found a perch easily. The no shoes had taken him time to adapt to, but Jake was right. His feet were far more useful out of his boots than they were in. He could feel the tree beneath his toes and knew how stable or slippery it was. There would be no more accidental tree nosedives today, or at least he hoped so. Walking along the barked branches of various trees, Harry was able to avoid 2 separate encounters with packs of viper wolves by being out of their range. The Navi were truly knowledgeable and experts in their field regarding how to survive on Pandora. He stopped every now and then to add a sample to his bag or pick some fruit to munch on as he went. There was a certain self-assurance that Harry had never felt before egging him on. Like the jungle was finally welcoming him home. A flutter of red petals flew past him in a gentle gust of wind that he watched float into the distance with fascination. From this perspective, the jungle seemed almost peaceful. Almost. Looking closer, he could see the circle of life. Skulls of fallen animals buried beneath the roots of trees, and the constant competition between species for resources. He traveled further than he thought. It was only when the sun started to go down that realized how long he had been traveling. Harry prepared to turn back and race back to the plane when he caught sight of it out the corner of his eye. a traviary. Similar to the miraculous fruit that had been snatched by the Navi during his encounter with the Venator. Looking around and triple-checking his scanner for threats, he approached with the utmost caution. He knew taking it could attract other animals, but there was an irresistible quality to the traviary. It shone with a mysterious quality that made Harry's mouth involuntarily start to salivate. He lacked the proper tools, but emptied his largest sample container, having to leave a particularly beautiful flower behind, cut and place the fruit inside. Without waiting for some sign, he started back at a jog. He needed to get back before dark. The journey was long, and by the time he reached the clearing where he left the plane, his blue form was panting heavily and dripping with sweat. A few animals had come around and tried to take the fruit from him, but thankfully nothing that wasn't scared off by a shot from his rifle. Climbing into the cabin and starting the takeoff procedure, he finally had time to think about what he could use it for. He was sure that Selfridge and his cronies would pay dearly for it. But what use was money to him? Far more interesting to keep and study it myself, Harry mentally decided. The biological mechanism of a universal panacea was beyond fascinating to a scientist such as himself. Besides, who didn't like having a super medicine as a fallback option? Ocean waves rose and fell in a steady pattern as Harry, in his rotorcraft, glided over them. A burst of water shot up into the air. An immense creature emerged from the water, its melodic voice calling out over the waves. 3 more followed the first, with the final one staying close to what appeared to be a baby. The creatures resembled whales that might have been found before the great extinction event of the 22nd century, however far larger. They had dark gray skin which shimmered with dark patterns on their skin. If they were natural or painted on, he wasn't sure. As they breached the water and dived back, he could see the animal had 4 eyes, 6 flippers, and multiple blowholes dotting its back. Harry flicked a few buttons to activate his scanning equipment. He had been following the creatures for several hours now, amazed at finding a creature this huge. His records were once again useless, with no human previously recording sightings of them before, and as such had not been assigned a name. He briefly considered naming them as the Discoverer, but quickly quashed that thought. He wanted to know what the native called them, not some made-up name. He was starting to understand more about this pod. They gracefully slid through waves and seemed large enough to deter attacks on them. Even then, he witnessed the bond between mother and calf. The baby whale was also by the side of the largest whale in the group, never given the chance to get lost or left behind. The sound they made was also interesting. Beyond the musical quality of their calls and clicks, Harry noticed they often repeated sounds. Could it be? Harry thought in wonderment. Looking at his instruments, it was becoming increasingly clear. It was a language. What they were saying was beyond him for now. To decipher a language, any language, he needed at least some parts that he knew what they meant as reference points. Another research topic, Harry nodded happily at finding something else that he could use to satiate his unending curiosity, at least for a time. The whales divided back down below the surface, and Harry knew they wouldn't surface for several minutes. Shutting down his equipment, he checked the horizon for threats. A large reef of rock was ahead that sheltered a group of low-lying islands. He guided the plane to approach and saw something he hadn't expected. Navi. They had built huts along the water's edge, with netted walkways connecting different islands together. Great rock pools lay in the shadow of the reef that the blue figures worked in, pulling in nets of fish and underwater plants. Sea creatures and Navi played in harmony in the bay, with several riding Ilu, just like the one that had taken residence on his island, with great speed. Larger, more fearsome creatures with many teeth were also present, although they had riders on too. Perhaps some sort of warrior's mount. He hovered there for a moment, taking in this find. He and the rest of the humans back at the mining camp had no idea Navi lived in the ocean, assuming they all lived in the forest. Calls soon echoed throughout the island, and the natives quickly melded into the water and away from his position. Several of the warriors' mounts, he remembered, had been called Surik, skim wings, that could not only swim through the water, but their wings meant they could glide in the air for a time as well, started to approach him. Taking a chance, he brought the plane down, as far away from the village as he could. Taking a step out, he raised his hands in the unvisceral gesture of peace. A group of spear-wielding natives rode over, shooting various words which he could only interpret as a threat. Nimue. Nimue. Peace, Harry called out, trying to avoid a repeat of his previous encounter. He had left his rifle on the seat of the plane, not in his hands, but only a short distance away if it did become violent. A large-built man dismounted and approached, holding his spear out threateningly. As he did, Harry noticed for the first time that this tribe was very different from the Na'vi he had seen before or himself. Their coloring was more turquoise compared to his royal blue. Their tail was far thicker, with the hands similarly streamlined, still having the traditional 4 fingers to his 5. He could see the adaptations that this tribe must have evolved to have over thousands of years. Charles Darwin, still proving his relevance. Seeing the spear tip approach him, he refocused. Nimue, he tried again. The figure finally paused. Harry assumed he must be a leader, or as the native called them, awakens. His body was decorated with several tribal garments, however that didn't hide the pure muscle and strength. Harry knew if it turned into a fight, he would be more than lucky to escape. Faib Saya Fkongar? What are you called? Fortunately, Harry's Na'vi had improved enough that they was starting to hear the language almost as clearly as he would English. S/N. From here, many of the Na'vi conversations will be written in English, as that is how Harry is hearing it now. I will indicate Na'vi by using italics within speech marks, e.g., hello. Harry. Harry? They echoed, and he nodded. I come in peace. One of the warriors dismounted and approached his leader. He whispered something in his ear and started hatefully at Harry. You know Na'vi, he stated. It was not a question, but Harry thought he needed to explain. No. Harry struggled to find the word and could only say it in English. Avatar. Dreamwalker. That started murmured concerns from the gathered crowd. Despite being far away from the mining site, they had still heard of his kind before. He doubted that was a good thing. Tell me, demon. Why shouldn't we kill you, as Sky people have so many Na'vi? The awakens' angry eyes burned into him as he tapped his spearhead over Harry's rapidly beating heart. Nimue. He was starting to panic. I'm an explorer. Leaner. I study the ways of. He was about to try and explain his scientific interests when he decided to shift to a more relatable topic for them. Iwa. They laughed at him. It wasn't pleasant to be mocked by a tribe of people, but at least it meant they weren't threatening to kill him. Sky people can't see. Sky people can't learn. Sky people can't hear Iwa. The warrior beside the leader spat out. Leave, the awakens commanded, finally withdrawing his spear and indicating to the plane. You're not welcome here. Harry looked back at his rotorcraft and then back to the village. The opportunities here to learn about the Na'vi and this water tribe were endless. Ruts, please, he begged. I just want to learn from you. Say sick. No way. Leave or your bones will live with the Metkayina eternally. Harry filed that word away, Metkayina. That must be what they call themselves. As a last resort, Harry slowly moved to his plane. He reached in and took a small round of ice. He threw it to the feet of their leader. The surrounding warriors didn't like that. Spears were raised again very quickly. But their leader's gesture stopped them at seeing no threat. Harry tried to explain. It's a communication device. If you need my help, you press that button on the top and I'll know you want something from me. Seeing he was about to be refused, Harry continued. Iwa Ngaha, may Iwa be with you, and quickly got into the craft and took off. It was time to head home. Having lost the trail of the giant whale-like creatures, he made sure to record the Metkayina's location before flying home. Harry chose a different route back, looping around to explore a wider area. He had found several islands and concluded he must have entered some sort of archipelago. As his path found several islands, each time he went in closer, hoping to find another tribe that might be more friendly toward him, yet found no signs. Until he noticed broken netting on one island. Landing his plane, the island was far smaller than the others he had seen. He approached cautiously, checking his thermal scanner as he walked, but found no life except for that in the ocean or the birds in the sky. A large, netted dwelling had been here at some point. All that remained were the ruins and torn shards of a tribe long destroyed. He reached down to trace a broken pot half buried in the sand. Looking around, he saw the signs of additional dwellings, the marks on trees, all that remained of their existence. Harry found various artifacts of this destroyed tribe, but chose to leave them. To plunder such a ruin would not only be disrespectful, but immoral. Whatever had ended this tribe had happened over 50 years ago. The humans had only been here for a few decades and couldn't be responsible for this. "What happened to you?" he whispered to the wind. There could have been many causes: a great storm, conflict, disease, migration, and many more. Even the tribes with long legacies weren't immortal. All things had a beginning and an end on Pandora. The cycle of life and death. He made a note of the position and resumed his journey. He had managed to locate several islands that his satellite images failed to identify. Pandora's atmosphere, as well as areas of magnetic interference, made orbital imagery unreliable at the best of times. The locations would all serve as excellent research points where could find more varied plants and wildlife to study. Finally arriving back home on his island, he walked to the peak and looked down on his domain. Seeing the Metkayina tribe had shown him all the opportunities living with the sea could present. He brought up the images captured from his flyover. The way that pools of water were layered together to create areas for agriculture was ingenious. He was sure that they hadn't drastically altered the environment to suit their needs, but with his drones, he could start to reshape the shallower areas to mirror the tribe's design. Already the great blocks of stone he had excavated had been placed along the seabed, forming a wave barrier. Even the wildlife had bounced back from his initial destruction, slowly but surely covering the blocks, forming the beginnings of a new reef. Chirp! Chirp! The Ilu poked his head out and called a greeting. It was strange, but all the sounds it made were starting to make more sense to him. He couldn't help but smile. It might be a pest and insatiably hungry, but Harry couldn't deny that having someone, or something to return to, filled his heart with joy. He went past his house to pull several fish he had placed in cold storage and went to the beach. He had a friend to feed after all. Left. Right. Strike. Dodge. Strike. Block. Harry's blue form darted around his training room, assaulting his mechanical training droid. On Earth, this sort of device was used to train elite soldiers to master the myriad martial arts that had been developed over thousands of years of Earth's history. Harry was no elite soldier. By including the footage and therefore the experience of thousands of hours of masters of combat, he was able to program the machine to train him to fight. Luckily, he could adjust the difficulty and speed of his opponents. However, his progress was still slow. Painfully slow. The limited combat training he had experienced at the base was useful, but not enough. Harry was determined to learn not only Earth's mightiest fighting styles, but also the Navi's. There was less footage of them, however he was able to extrapolate from the little he did possess. That meant he could safely fight against opponents repeatedly, building up his skills until he was proficient to protect his life. Learning how to react. Learning how to win. Smack. The machine's thankfully cushioned limbs punched his cheek and sent him rolling on the floor. Stars dotted his eyes as he fought to regain his vision. That hurt, he roared in his head. All right, that's how you want it, he challenged and charged with every intention to claim his revenge. He dodged the first strike and was able to use his forearm to block the next. Taking the opportunity, he used the foam knife in his hand to go for the killing blow. Shush! Harry's legs vanished from underneath him as the machine swiped his legs. The sudden weightlessness caused his grip on the knife to fail. The machine quickly took advantage. As Harry hit the padded floor, his knife, was pressed against his throat. Dead. The machine intoned without any feeling or pride. With a sigh, he reset the program and prepared to have another go. He paused, then decided to lower the difficulty by another notch. He was getting bored of losing. The next few rounds were far more even, with Harry still losing 2 more bouts, but claiming victory in the 4th. Beep, beep, beep. His wrists started to vibrate and alert him. He moved to the control center of the base. Large hollow monitors hung on the walls with quick access to all the defenses and sensors he had started setting up. Looking at the long-range sensors of the mainland, he saw it. A great Leonopteryx. It swooped down low over the jungle, hunting a smaller prey that divided and dodged its grasping claws. Its red and yellow skin was flashing dangerously, like a living fire just waiting to consume all in its paths. Harry pressed a large red button. Doors started to shut and the turrets, the 2 sets he had installed, word to life beginning to track the beast in case it decided to investigate his island. He focused the lens on the poor prey that was being hunted with such enthusiasm. The lens blurred and then cleared. He could see a banshee, green and blue. No, not blue. The blue was a smaller figure crouched on its back desperately trying to hang on. Navi. Struck with horror, Harry could only watch. The great Leonopteryx could rip apart his plane with ease and his turrets didn't have enough range to hit it at such a distance. A rescue was out of the question. The Navi guided his banshee to bank left, then in another quick turn, before finally diving down. The Leonopteryx bite just missed the banshee's tail. He saw the Navi look back in triumph. Harry could imagine the Navi thinking how lucky he was. He was wrong. The claws of the great beast reached out with a speed unexpected of one his size. The claws raked the back of the banshee and over the Navi. Droplets of crimson blood showered the air. Harry felt his breath hitch in his throat. The pair fell into the forest below, through the thick vegetation of the treetops. The great Leonopteryx tried to follow, to finish its hunt, but was stopped by the green barrier of the thick trees. It released a screech of anger that Harry knew would terrify any local wildlife, then flew off back further inland to hunt other prey. Harry let out a breath. Seeing one in close action was both amazing and terrifying. He looked at the carnage of the fight. His camera could catch the glint of red in the treetops. Were they dead? He asked himself. He continued looking before he came to decision. He would go and find out. His scanners indicated a storm was incoming, but he should have time, if he was fast. Releasing the lockdown and grabbing an extra medical kit, he hurried to his rotorcraft and took off. The flight was short as he pushed the engines as far as he could. The first storm winds constantly trying to push him, of course, and into the waves below. When he approached, he knew he wouldn't be able to get close by coming down through the trees. If it was thick enough to stop a great Leonopteryx, it would stop his plane. Instead, he slowed down and started to weave through the trees, far closer to the ground. Too close to the ground for comfort. He dodged trees left and right. Vines tore at his craft, and he only hoped they wouldn't break the engine or he would be stranded. Seeing a shaft of light in the distance and the broken remains of trees where the beast had tried to force its way in, Harry knew he had arrived. Setting the rotorcraft down, he nervously approached on foot. The banshee was the first victim he saw. The flesh along its side and back was torn bone deep. A wing had almost been completely severed from the fall. Its head hanging ever so slightly open, revealing only a hint of the danger within. Its eyes wide and dead. Harry only hoped its end had been quick. Looking around for the rider, he suddenly heard a groan. Spinning around to a large patch of colorful fern-type plants, he moved in. Gently moving the plant to the side, he saw the Navi. He lay on his side, a leg bent with a bone poking through the flesh. Across his chest, Harry could see the claw marks of the beast. Thankfully, they were shallower than he initially thought. He imagined most of the damage must have been taken by his ride. "I've got you, brother. Rest well," Harry whispered soothingly as he reached into his medical kit. He didn't know if he could help him. The injuries were beyond critical. Looking at him, Harry could see he was young. Younger than even the gathering party he had encountered before. He would be surprised if he was of an age to even take the hunter trails. For a moment, just a single short second, the Navi opened his eyes and looked into his. He applied the bandages. Injected him with various compounds that would reduce the blood loss and encourage rapid healing. Looking at the gashes, he applied a spray before squeezing the 2 sides of flesh together. Taking the leg, he tried to set the bone back into place, which he then had to close the wound and apply a brace to keep it straight. He worked tirelessly for several minutes. He had attached sensors to the patient so he could observe his heart rate and other vital signs. He was no longer dying as quickly. His wounds, however, were too deep to fully close quickly and constantly wept blood around the seals he had put into place. His work had brought him time, though. He looked back his plane and then back to his patient. If he took the Navi back to the island, he had set up some medical equipment that might help. And, he thought slowly, there was always the Traviary. Picking up the Navi with as much gentleness as he could muster, ignoring the slow trickle of blood running down his chest, he carried him to the rotorcraft. Tying him down in the passenger seat beside his, he started his return journey. This time with his first guest. Unconscious and near death. But still, the first guest. Harry held the Traviary in his hands, looking at it wistfully. He had barely had a chance to research it beyond an initial scan. All the other tests and experiments he could have completed with it might have revolutionized medical science. On the other hand, he could save this kid's life. Harry sighed. It wasn't a choice. All the other medical equipment he had failed to do more than slow down the Navi's death. He needed something more. Something miraculous. Using his hand to force open his patient's mouth, he squeezed the juice of the fruit onto his throat, then shut his mouth and held his nose, forcing him to swallow. He repeated it 3 more times until a healthy blue color started to return to his skin. The wounds that were slowly trickling blood stopped. From the scanners, he observed the bones starting to knit together. The flesh around his cuts wriggling together until smooth, unblemished skin remained. They were all within Harry's expectations from hearing about the fruit. What he didn't expect was the additional marking that seemed to form on the boy's skin. A pattern of light that shone as if a flower blooming rippled across his skin. It was something that went beyond his understanding of science. If he was a religious man, he would have called it a miracle. Seeing the Navi's heart sound stronger with every beat, he relaxed. He sank into a nearby chair and closed his eyes. The day's exhaustion catching up to him. Beep. Beep. His green eyes opened suddenly, looking around wildly. He had fallen asleep. The Navi was currently trying to yank the connecting wires from his body. Nimue. Peace. Who are you? Where am I? What have you done to me? He responded with blind panic. Nimue. You are at my home. I found you injured in the forest. I brought you here to heal you. To save your life. Harry gestured to his wounds that were not little more than faint lines and would probably disappear soon. Where am I? He repeated, looking around at the very un-Navi-like furnishings. My home. An island just off the coast. The young boy's head turned left and right, scanning the surroundings, and when finally seeing the familiar coastline in the distance, concluded. Badrock Island? It was more of a literal translation of what the natives must have called his home. Harry made a mental note to rebrand his home with a different name. Something more fitting. Ignoring the commentary on his island, Harry continued. You were attacked by the Torek. Do you remember? The boy's eyes went wide and nodded. He started looking around as if he had lost something. Reyna. Reyna, he called out. He made a whistling sound. When nothing happened, he looked at Harry with pleading eyes. Only then did Harry understand. You're Ikrin? He asked, knowing this would be a difficult topic. The young boy's head bounced up and down, shouting, Where? Shaking his head, Harry explained. It didn't survive the attack. When I found you, it was already with Iwa. Spontaneously, the young Navi boy burst into tears. Harry reached out and held him close, letting his shirt dry the boy's eyes. The loss of a loved one, no matter the species, was always hard. The young Navi boy had cried his heart out until he blissfully fell into a deep and restful sleep. Harry scooped up the boy and placed him in his bed, not having a spare as company were not expected. Morning light filtered through the glass, causing the first guest of the island to gradually open his eyes into wakefulness. Harry was by his side, offering a plate of chopped fruit and undersea plants he had previously harvested. The Navi took the plate, looking quite unsure of what to do with it. Harry's easy smile at least made him feel safe. Taking a cautious bite, his body soon remembered how long it had been since his last meal and quickly scoffed the remaining down. Harry took the plate before it ruined his sheets. Getting juice out would have been a nightmare. I think it's time for introductions. Harry started. My name is Harry, he said, using his hands to indicate himself. Faib Saya FK Ongar? What are you called? The boy seemingly ignored him, instead far more interested in examining this alien environment he found himself in. Trying to stand, he noticed one of his legs was encased in a hard material, not letting him move it at all. His nails gripped the edge as he tried to rip himself free. Dang. Stop. Harry reached out to prevent him from undoing all his hard work, but all he got was a shove to the side as the child attempted to limp away, running straight to freedom and the beach. Bang! The Navi had run straight into the glass wall that surrounded his resistance. Lying dazed on the floor, Harry's face leaned over him and offered his hand. Pulling him up, he showed him how to open the doors and go outside, a barely concealed laughter on his lips. The Navi youth quickly shuffled outside, awkwardly due to the cast, trying to stay distant from the stranger that might have saved his life, but also might be keeping him captive. What have you done to me? Take it off. No. It's to help you. Your bones, they were broken. That is making sure they heal straight. Take it off now and you might walk with a limp for the rest of your life. Harry tried to explain. He tried to introduce himself again and return to happier topics. Harry, he again touched his chest to indicate himself. The youth stood taller as if trying to intimidate Harry with his name. I am Aresar. I demand freedom from this shell. Harry looked at him quietly for a moment, trying to come to a decision. If he had been on Earth, any injury such as this would have needed several days of observation and medical checks before being allowed out. However, he was no longer on Earth. He was on Pandora, and Aresar was no human. Harry finally nodded his head. So be it. Follow. Without looking back, Harry led Aresar to his infirmary. It wasn't fully set up, but enough to remove a cast. Wheeling a metal table around, he patted it and instructed the youth to lie down. The Navi's suspicious eyes followed his every move. The easiest solution was a cast saw, which was perfectly safe against skin. However, he doubted that his patient would sit still enough if he brought over anything that looked like a threat. Instead, he took out a device that looked more like a pen. Leaning over the plastered leg, he activated his portable laser to burn through the cast. It was a quick procedure, last under a minute until a clear cut extend from thigh to ankle. Using his hands to crack open the cast and reveal the blue skin beneath. Finally free, Aresar tried to stand up but was pushed back down by Harry's much larger hands. I need to check it. Wait. The boy didn't refuse but responded with a hiss. Pulling over his scanner, he took several images of the leg. Amazingly, the bones were virtually healed. A single night was enough for the miraculous properties of the fruit to fully repair bones. The wound where the bone had penetrated his skin was still marred, but more like an old scar rather than a recent injury. It's all good. You can stand now. Hardly needing the instruction, Aresar jumped to his feet and began testing his bones by hopping from foot to foot. My bone was broken. How? Now no longer restrained, the inquisitiveness of youth finally surfaced. Harry smiled sadly, not happy to be reminded by what had to give up in order to heal the strange native. He reached to a nearby monitor and pulled up an image of the Traviari. Aresar froze. He recognized the fruit. He had seen elders and honored warriors be given such a blessing before. It was one of the highest honors and rewards in a tribe for the elite Navi. The fruit were rare and couldn't be cultivated, only chanced upon in the vast expanse of forests by the will of Iwa. They could not only heal injuries, but to the Navi, it was much more. The Traviari would strengthen the body and give longer life, allowing the greatest stewards of the tribe to defend the people for longer. Those who had tasted the Traviari were no longer simple Navi. They were blessed by Yuya. They were the honored Serum. Serum was a more literal translation of bone, and those chosen few were now the bones of the tribe. An essential foundation to its strength. Harry was fascinated as Aresar explained the history and importance of the Traviari to the tribes. Does that mean you are now one of the Serum? Harry questioned. Aresar shrugged his shoulders, unsure of the answer. I ate the fruit, yes. But I wasn't given it by the awakens. They are meant to be chosen by Iwa. Harry thought for a moment and rubbed his chin. A habit ingrained in him from his human days when he had facial hair. Iwa acts through all things: animals, plants, weather, people. Yes. With a confused nod, he continued. Then I chose you. If Iwa is with me, that means she chose you too? Right? The crooked logic at least made Aresar smile before shaking his head at the stupid alien. You know nothing, Harry. Come, let's give you the royal tour. Harry quickly changed the subject and took the youth by the hand to guide him through his home. As he went, Harry took great pleasure in pointing out all the little details that a native navvy hadn't experienced before. And here is the desalination plant. I made a pipe that runs to the ocean that feeds the salty water here. Then it takes the salt out, leaving clean drinking water. Here, try some, pulling a tap. He gave Aresar a glass. Looking at it with puzzlement, the Nazi placed it back down without tasting. Harry, even babies know salt water bad. Drink from the water that falls from the sky. Much better. Aresar offered in a helpful mood before looking ahead for the next stupid idea the Sky people had gotten wrong. Choosing to not enter a scientific debate with someone far beneath his age, he continued the tour, eventually leading him outside to the fields of crops that had just started sprouting. Your home is strange, Harry. Aresar commented, not sure why Sky people felt the need to have so much stuff. Iowa provided all they needed, and they saw no reason to take more. Razar turned and looked toward the distant coastline of the mainland. His tribe was out there, over the vast body of water. He wouldn't be able to swim that, and he didn't think he could find another Ikran, Banshee, to tame on this remote island. Harry, I want to return home. To the tribe. Harry nodded. I can take you back. The hopeful glint returned to Aresar's eyes. When? He demanded. A few days. At the sign of outrage, he explained. Look out to sea. That's a storm incoming. The winds could swap my plane into the ocean, and then we'd both be in trouble. As if on cue, lightning crackled in the distance, and the dark clouds overhead broke open to release a flood of rain on the pair. Come, let's get inside. Harry guided the youth into his home, and out of the weather. With another look outside, Aresar turned to his host and kindly suggested, at least you'll be able to collect some clean water, Harry. Bang. Strike. Slash. The blue form rocketed around the training room, fighting the droid with a smile permanently plastered on his lips. A foam knife in each hand. Harry stood to one side watching Aresar with mixed feelings. Seeing a true native Na'vi fight was extremely helpful to him. He had already identified several errors in his movements that he could improve upon. Alternatively, Aresar was getting very close to beating his record. A child. Not that Harry would ever admit it to the youth. They had been stuck on the island for 2 days. The storm still raged outside, but his recent scans showed it was starting to slow. He could hear the waves crashing against the shore in a continued assault. His ocean defense plan having very little impact on Pandora's great waves and would perhaps need to explore different options. Aresar had been very difficult with repeatedly trying to convince Harry to take him back. All the distractions that Harry offered that worked so well with human youth seemed ineffective. Aresar had no interest in movies, books, cooking, games, and was very confused by human music. The only thing of Harry's that seemed to hold his attention was the training room. Aresar had spent several hours abusing and being abused by the training droid. Even when Harry switched the program to use more human martial arts, Aresar was able to quickly adapt and even incorporate some of the moves and techniques into his own fighting style. Genius, Harry thought. Rasaar had invited his host to join him several times, but Harry had refused as politely as he could. Despite being far larger, physically stronger, and more experienced, Harry was confident all that awaited him would be an embarrassment. The storm's starting to break. A few hours, and it should be clear enough to take you home. Harry called over when a particularly violent bout had concluded. Aresar, who was lying on the floor, quickly sprung up, his eyes wide with joy. Then I must train Harry. Aresar be best hunter in tribe. That will show them. With renewed energy, Aresar continued. Harry eventually had to walk away and busy himself elsewhere. Aresar had just completed the level that he had been stuck on for the last week. The two blue forms strapped into the plane and took off. The last remnants of the storm still howling, but not enough to do more than shake his transport. Hissing at the strap over his chest, he turned to the strange alien to give him more advice. Plane no good. Friend Harry should find Ikran. Much better. Harry could help but let a small smile play on his face. He was going to miss Aresar and his not very helpful comments. I haven't. He struggled to remember the correct word, so instead just held his brain and showed the strange pink tendrils that connected to his nervous system. The doctors at the mining base had called it a neural queue. Twin. Neural queue, Aresar offered. Then his jaw opened with an understanding of what Harry was saying. Harry not formed Sahelu? The bond ever. Now he really looked at Harry as if he was an alien. Aresar had formed the bond many times with all sorts of US creatures ever since he was a child. Harry was grown, yet had never experienced a key aspect of Navi culture. Why? I wouldn't know where to begin. Sahelu isn't something the Sky people know much about. Aresar just shook his head, mentally scolding the Sky people for their stupidity. Trying to find a topic that he wouldn't be further shamed for in from of Aresar, Harry brought up another unanswered question. How did you end alone in the forest anyway? You look a bit young to be taking your hunting trials. Aresar looked away guiltily, instead looking at the ocean blurring past there under their feet. With a final look at Harry, the person who had saved him and blessed him with a Traviari, he spoke his truth. I was not allowed to join this season's hunter trials. I was going to prove I was ready. I did prove I was ready. I tamed an Ikran. If only the Torek didn't find me. His head lowered as remembered his fallen bondmate. Aresar had earlier tried to explain that when bonded, they feel everything. That meant when his precious Reyna had been killed, the young boy had felt it. All of it. I bet your parents will be pleased to see you safe. They must have been very worried. Aresar is alone. He admitted silently. Harry took a few moments to translate in his head. Alone. Aresar was an orphan. He remembered a chapter in Grace Augustine's book that explained that tribes were hierarchical. Orphans were cared for by all, but they represented the lowest standing in the tribe until they were recognized, such as by becoming a hunter. Those who didn't were often marginalized or left to become wanderers. The perennial travelers with no fixed home to return to, cut off from the ancestors. Harry, with a sudden burst of parental affection, reached over and squeezed Aresar's hand. Never alone, Razar smiled and wiped the tears that had been starting to form in his eyes away. Yes, never alone. Harry was about to continue and even offer to host the youth, who he was getting increasingly attached to, so he could be there for him, when Aresar cut him off in a chipper tone. Iwa is with us all. Never alone. A single tear slipped down Harry's face as Aresar's blue form disappeared into the forest. He could still hear the parting words hanging in the air like a promise. Friends do not say goodbye. Instead, we say see you soon. Harry had been shocked by the mature and touching comment, so had merely replied with, Iwa Gaha, may Iwa be with you. Climbing back into the rotorcraft and lifting off into the fresh morning breeze, Harry held the craft still and took in the view. The forest below covered the land from the cliffs to the horizon. The giant trees that stretched far above the rest, Aresar had informed him were called Totrel, sky tree, and were often the location of tribes or packs of beasts such as the Ikran. Harry had wanted to find out exactly where Aresar's tribe was located. It would have been amazing to see, but there was too much conflict between humans and Navi for him to risk his new friend's home for his curiosity. Better they kept some distance. Looking outwards to sea, his island was illuminated by the still busy drones and the lights of his residence. However, something was different. It seemed colder, lonelier than before. The absence of Aresar's larger-than-life personality was felt more deeply than he expected. He had only been there for a few days, but had imprinted heavily on Harry's heart. With a tilt of the handle, the plane glided to the right and further out to sea. Now would be a good time to have another exploration. No need to go back to an empty home just yet. The storm was far more severe than expected. The high winds and waves he experienced on his island, which grounded his plane for several days, were nothing but the outskirts of a far larger storm. It seemed Pandora did everything big: creatures, people, plants, and now storms. He passed islands he had flown over just weeks ago, but now could only navigate using the computer as he failed to recognize many of the landmarks. Trees had been ripped from their roots to be dumped far away. Great rock formations had crumbled under the storm's fury and now lay as rubble on the seafloor. Even the great roots of the world, which formed mangrove-like protection, were left cracked or broken. He used the instruments and sensors on board to track the path of the storm. Luckily, it seemed to have missed the Metkayina tribe, originating further east. Flying in the tail of the storm, Harry flew from island to island, tracking the devastation. Such a storm would be a rare occurrence, and any chance to gather data on its impact on the local ecosystems would be invaluable for his research. The sun had crested midday, but Harry persisted, going further into the archipelago than he had ever gone, to islands not yet discovered. Far better to keep going and camp overnight on some foreign island than return home with half-finished data. The scientist in him shook with joy at all the opportunities. Crises such as these provided rare glimpses into the hardier aspects of Pandora, to find the mechanisms that would restart life. An example would be the roots of the world, a plant that grew so large that tribes of Na'vi often made their home nestled in its grasp. He had seen several examples of where all else had been destroyed, but they remained if a little damaged. The few trees and plants under it had been far better protected. That is what he needed for his home. Harry's island lacked such protection from the elements. If he could find a seed or a cutting, he might be able to cultivate it at his home. Beep. The thermal life sign detector sent out an alert. Harry looked at it annoyed. He had spent hours tweaking the programming after it was beeping for any life signs, which on Pandora was everywhere. He had altered it for the jungle, to detect the Na'vi life signs, so there shouldn't be anything triggering it in the middle of the ocean. Seeing the red dot on his screen, he arched his body to look down through the glass screen of the cabin. There was something there. Something floating on the surface. Alone. Swooping down lower to get a better image, he recognized it. It was Ilu. Larger than his hungry friend and with more orange in his coloring. However, the milky eyes meant only one thing. It was dead. Still clutching the Ilu was a Na'vi. One of the reef people with much lighter coloring than the forest variants. She had dark hair that was spread over her shapely body. Tribal tattoos decorated her young face, looking otherworldly peaceful. She was undeniably beautiful, even to Harry's confused human sensibilities. She was also undeniably not moving. Harry couldn't tell if she had passed on to Iwa or was still clinging to life. Taking the plane lower until the waves lapped the base of the craft, he kicked out a rope ladder. A bloody wound on the Ilu's head was now clear. Harry imagined it being thrown around in the storm, hitting a rock and drifting far out to sea, far away from any possible rescue. Taking off his shirt and replacing it with a life vest, he dived into the bottomless ocean water. This was no swim in his little bay. There were no luminescent plants here to guide and comfort him. Darkness lay beneath him, which only the most fearsome creatures could inhabit. He felt the absence of the ground beneath his feet, even as he floated. Every second a trespass. Ignoring his primal reaction, he swam over to the Na'vi. Close enough now to reach out. His fingers stretched out toward her throat. He would be able to feel her pulse there. Suddenly, she let out a low moaning sound. Snatching back his hands, still treading water to stay afloat, Harry smiled. She was alive. She tried to sit up, to see who was there, only to lose her balance. Slipping off the Ilu's corpse on the opposite side to Harry. Not believing his eyes, Harry looked down into the water and saw her starting to sink into the unknown. Steeling his nerves, he divided down in the blackness. Further and further, he swam down. The pursuit stretched on, never quite fast enough to catch up. The light dimmed and Harry could feel the water closing in around him. A pressure trying to force his breath out of his burning lungs. A final push resulted in him in catching the wrist of the Na'vi. Pulling her into his chest, he wrapped an arm securely around her. Looking up at the shimmering reflection of the plane, he pulled on his life vest. The red jacket quickly inflated and pulled him and the Na'vi upwards towards the light. Breaching the water, Harry gasped for breath. His underwater training mentally moving up on his priority list. With a Herculean effort, he moved the Na'vi to his shoulder and forced his burning muscles to climb the ladder. Collapsing on the desk of his plane, he tried to regain control of his breathing but failed. Ragged breaths coming fast and shallow. Splash! A wave came through the open door and into his mouth. Spluttering, he slid the door shut and then staggered into the cockpit to pull the lever back. The plane moved skyward, out of the range of the waves and anything that may hide within. Returning to the Navy, Harry placed his ear on her chest. Nothing. For once, he was thankful for the mining base. They had at least included some basic medical training. Following the steps in his memory, he performed CPR, pushing down on her chest, not only to restart her heart but also help to expel any water from her lungs. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, he locked his lips around her and blew in. Her chest rose and then fell. Harry listened for a response. Nothing. Repeating over and over, Harry was determined not to give in. If she had lasted all this time in the middle of the ocean, he refused to accept it was her time to die just as he arrived. Cough. The Navy woman suddenly coughed and splattered, the water-blocking airways finally dispelled. Looking up at Harry with grateful eyes, she tried to speak, but soon collapsed into an exhausted slumber. Finally safe. Taking the opportunity, Harry touched down on the nearest island. His inner scientist finally settling down after his latest ocean adventure. What do I do now? He asked no one in particular. The Navy was still unconscious. He would, of course, help her to get home, but where that could be was anyone's guess. Looking at the peaceful face, he couldn't help but imagine RSR making some sarcastic comment about his good luck in finding injured Navy. Glancing upwards, the sun was starting to set, covering the sea with a sheen of red. He would need to make camp here and search for her home in the morning. He unpacked the tent and attached it to the side of the rotorcraft, digging in the stakes deep to prevent the storm's ebbing winds from whisking his shelter away in the night. Finding a tree half buried in the sand, a recent victim of the storm, he attacked it with an axe, taking the smaller branches off with single powerful swings. Collecting the branches into a pile over a lighting block, he took out a small box of matches to start the fire. It might not have been the native way, however he was in no mood to use the temperamental flint and steel. Gently, he lifted the Navy into the tent and set her down on the camp bed. Taking a blanket out of a compartment on the plane, he draped it over her shoulders before leaving. Supper wasn't going to catch itself. Sukkel, the Navy, introduced herself in the morning. Harry. I thank you, Harry. Without you, the sea would have claimed my life. She reached out and touched Harry's arm. Blood rushed to Harry's cheeks. Could avatars blush? Harry was starting to wish he had a mirror. Iwa guides us all. His response made Sukkel smile shyly. You know much of our ways, Harry, not many. Demons? Harry offered. He had heard it often enough. He supposed if he saw aliens that could take human form and were trying to dominate his world, calling them demons wouldn't be a stretch. Shaking her head, Sukkel finished, aliens. Not many of the sky people learn of Iwa. I have heard terrible things from travelers who bring news of the destruction they bring to the forests. I wish I could tell you it's all lies, that humans are the great peacekeepers we claim to be. Looking into her eyes, looking for a reaction, he finished. Sadly, I can't. What of you, Harry? Do you seek destruction also? I came to this world for a second chance. Somewhere away from the problems of humanity. Somewhere where I can learn and discover in peace. He raised his hands and looked at his additional finger. It was something so small, meaningless in the grand scheme, yet it would forever represent his difference. His attachment to the humans that ravaged this world. But he was only one man. What could he do? Thinking back, he could have tried to negotiate with the RDA, perhaps even buy some of the planet to make a sanctuary for the Navy. But that wasn't what they wanted, a gilded prison. All they needed or desired was to be left in peace with Iwa. This was their planet. What right did humans have to take it? As Harry looked into Sukkel's eyes, one thing was clear, his heart now beat for the Navy. Humans had ruined their world. He couldn't and wouldn't sit back and watch history repeat itself. He would protect them. Protect her. A silent vow was made between Harry and whatever deities existed. He would dedicate his life to helping the Navy in whatever way he could. Not out of some selfish desire for research material, although that would have been tempting, but as compensation for all the harm his previous species has inflicted to this world and its people. That vow would define his very existence, now and into the distant future. And it all started with Sukkel. Let's take you home. Sukkel was being stubborn. For hours she had insisted on trying to find an aquatic mount, an Ilu or Tsurik, skim wing, with little success. The great storm must have forced them further out to sea, where they could hide safely under the waves. It is safe. I promise. Sukkel, if you would just. That thing is not Navi, Harry. It does not breathe with Iowa. How can you trust something so dead? Harry could hear that Sukkel was getting increasingly irritated. This was not the first time he had tried and was equally rebuffed each time. For reef people who were at home in the water, the sky was an unfamiliar domain. You've not found anything yet. If we wait any longer, we might lose the day's light. Turning her back to him, trying to refuse his logic. She was still injured and not able to swim as she would have normally. Harry gently caressed the small of her back, making her lean into his strong chest. Trust me, he pleaded. With a final sigh of resignation, she agreed. They loaded the rotorcraft back up and took off. Sukkel taking the co-pilot seat beside his. Going to the nearest island, Harry asked, "Do you recognize anything?" Shaking her head, they continued. Island after island. There. Sukkel suddenly shouted out, snapping Harry awake and alert. Following her guide, Harry flew over the island. It was small, however, consisted of a single tall outcrop of rock that extended over 100 meters high. Outcast Island. Your tribe's here? Harry asked delicately. The thermal life sign detector showed no Navi. No, but I have heard my uncle speak of it. I know the way. We must travel towards where the sun rests. Mentally translating, the sun rose in the east, so Sukkel must have meant west. They had their first lead. Arr! Sukkel cried out. Tears streamed from her eyes freely. Why, great mother? Why? From the sky, they could both see the devastation wrought on her tribe. It was smaller than the Metkayina clan Harry had visited before, covering a far smaller area. The tribe had made their home in a younger world's roots plant. The Crystal Bay, the most vital part to the reef people, lay in ruins. Trees floated on the surface next pale-eyed fish. The once beautiful and colorful coral now drifted with the tides, gray and dead. Some Navi were shuffling around, which Sukkel had let out an exclamation of happiness for. However, there were many more lying on the beach, being prepared for their final journey to rest with Iowa. Landing the plane on an empty section of beach, Harry got a closer look at the Navi's greatest loss. A spirit tree, smaller but similar to the great tree of souls that the Omaticea could commune with Iowa, was left broken. Its splintered trunk now resting on the beach. The once glowing altar to their ancestors and Iowa now lay lifeless. Sukkel stepped out of the plane and ran to the spirit tree. Falling to her knees before its limp branches, she screamed her fury to the wind. Harry followed and knelt beside her. Saying nothing. He couldn't say or do anything to fix this. It was the worst tragedy that could happen to a Navi tribe. Their whole culture centered around Iowa, and the spirit tree was their access point. But it was more. From the few virtual conversations he had with Jake Sully, he understood that these trees held the memories of their ancestors. Destroying that was severing the Navi's heritage. Even if they found another spirit tree, they could commune with Iowa, but their ancestors' voices would forever be lost. 3 Navi approached the pair. One, an old Navi woman with wrinkles and a limp, held a spear, followed closely by her 2 young companions equipped with stone knives. Before they got too far, they saw Sukkel before their deceased spirit tree. Smyuk. Sister. One of the young Navi dropped his knife and ran to Sukkel's awaiting arms. Her tears started flowing as they whispered greeting to each other. I thought you lost. I wanted to search, but the storm. Sukkel just held him tight, not wanting to let go. The other Navis approached Harry, now with less suspicion. Ol Ngadi Kami. I see you. The older female made the respectful sign first to Sukkel and then to Harry. A surprising honor he had never experienced before. He returned the greeting, desperately trying to remember his Navi etiquette lessons. Ol Ngadi Kami. I see you. As he started moving away to give them some space for a private reunion, Harry couldn't help but overhear. Mother? Father? The young boy just shook his head sadly as they both embraced again, their shared loss too much to bear alone. Faib saya fkongar Ewan? What are you called, youngling? Harry. He answered simply. Rubbing his pinky finger, he debated if he should tell this Navi his origin. Every time they knew his human connection, The Na'vi refused to have anything to do with him. Looking over at Sukal's crying form, he knew dishonesty would get him nowhere. Raising his hand to let the old women see his additional finger, he finished his introduction. Formerly of the Sky People, I am Orona. You have brought back a lost sister to us. The days have been long with mourning, but this is a ray of hope. We thank you for that, young Harry. They stood quietly for a moment, neither sure of what to do next. Harry eventually offered his aid. Your people have suffered greatly in the storm. I have some supplies and medicine. I offer them to you freely. Oriona's wrinkled face smiled at Harry. We have little to offer but gratitude. We thank you and will remember this good deed in our hearts. We welcome you, Harry, as a long-lost brother. Orona pulled Harry face down to her and kissed his forehead. A sort of blessing that a grandmother might do back on Earth, but to Harry it meant so much more. It was acceptance. He was no longer a demon. No longer where the eye does not see. He was one of the people. One of the Na'vi. Harry knelt at the side of what the Na'vi considered their infirmary. Their Tsahik, spiritual leader and healer, was one of the many killed by the storm. The many injured were left with only minimal medical help. Most Na'vi did not know how to care for the sick or dying, as that was knowledge reserved for the Tsahik. He quickly bandaged a wound and injected a blood coagulant into his patient. The large shard of a tree embedded in their leg had been taken out, and now Harry had to stop the blood loss. The Na'vi let out a hiss of pain. Harry took out another needle and injected. The Na'vi's eyes soon closed peacefully. Moving on to the next patient, Harry worked tirelessly. There were over 20 injured, many critically. Despite his best efforts, Harry knew he wouldn't be able to save them all. Some were too far gone. Some he lacked the proper equipment to save them. Harry started to wish he had enough Traviari for them all. Healing would have been far easier. The hours slipped by and darkness blanketed the world. Still, Harry continued. When one emergency was solved, another one would occur. An ending cycle of fix and repair. A few of the Na'vi had offered to help, however they could little more than put pressure on wounds and comfort the dying. Harry's medicine was from the Sky People, trying to teach that to them would have only taken time he didn't have. As the night wore on, Harry had at last a chance to catch his breath. He looked down at the remains of his medical kit. He had nearly exhausted it and the larger one from his rotorcraft. These Na'vi would need weeks of care. His spur-of-the-moment exploration lacked the supplies for an extended mission. Sukal drifted in front of his vision. So tired, he had not noticed her sitting there beside him. Harry, you must rest. Many lives have been saved, but you need sleep. Trying to pull his hand to rest beside her, Harry resisted and called out as he unsteadily wandered back to his rotorcraft. I need more supplies. Sitting in the cockpit, Harry started to put in commands to the computer. What he wanted to do was risky. You're leaving, Sukal accused. The hurt in her eyes almost broke his heart. No, my plane is. Seeing her confused look, he tried to explain. I have supplies back at my home. They can help your people. Food, clean water, shelter, medicine. Then who will bring all this back? The plane will. Or at least I hope it will. Harry had never used this feature before. He had programmed it into his base and transports to give him the freedom if he did need to remotely send commands back to his base. He was trying to program the ship to return to his island, order the drones to load the emergency supplies on board, and then return to this exact spot. If there was an issue with the navigation system, if there was an error in his code, if his ship was destroyed, Harry would be stranded. He didn't want to take that risk, but it was the only hope these Na'vi had at surviving. If he flew the plane back, he would be lucky if 2 or 3 survived. Inputting the final command, Harry quickly eased out of the cockpit and onto the sand. Sukal looked at him like he was mad, but at least she knew he wasn't abandoning her. The plane's motor started and quickly ascended into the night sky. The pair shielded their eyes from the sand blown up, and when the dust had cleared, the plane was gone. Sukal took his hand and pulled him over a fire with a large shell pot hanging over it. Eat, Harry. You need your strength. Harry tried to pull away. The patience, I need to. No. Her voice was firm. Eat. Taking the dish handed to him, a mix of boiled sea vegetables and clams, he ate quietly. The food was tasty, especially considering most of the tribe's food had been destroyed or washed away in the storm. Sukal sat beside him, eating her own dish. They said no words between them, simply enjoying the comforting presence of the other. Both needing the other. After a while, the food was finished. Harry looked at Sukal, staring deep into her blue eyes. Now was not the time for rest. The work was only just beginning. We need more limner root. Harry called out as he ground the last of the red plant into a powder using 2 large stones. Looking up at his assistant, Sukal, can you ask the diving team to look for more? It had been over a week since his arrival on the distant and remote island. The plane he had sent off for supplies had vanished. The journey should have taken 2, maybe 3 days at most. But every day when Harry looked to the horizon and saw nothing, it eroded what little hope he had left. The medical supplies had been quickly used up. While some patients had now recovered enough to be discharged from his care, and 3 had passed on, he still had 12 that required his attention. Most were broken bones, cuts from debris being flung around in the storm, or even severed limbs. Harry had to quickly adapt to local medicines. Thankfully, many of the same plants existed here as in his bay, allowing him to find several with medical properties. The limner root was a great example. When ingested, it helped to fight infections and speed the healing process, although finding it in the devastation of the storm was no easy task. Only the fittest could manage, having to free dive the whole way beyond the reef, the absence of their ilu and tsurax, skim wings, still hindering their range. Harry, a trio of Navi youth ran up to him, various yellow-leafed plants in their hands. You need sorrel leaf? They presented their offering to Harry, each with a different type of plant that roughly matched the description he'd given of another medical plant. Taking a closer look at them, he turned to Sukal's little brother, Turo. That's the sorrel leaf. See here, he flipped it over and showed the children. The veins form a crisscross pattern, and if you hold it up to the light, you can see small flecks of green. The children all watched enthralled. They had quickly become fond of the strange alien and were always looking for ways to help out. The 2 who now noticed their leaves were wrong tried to hide them behind their backs. Harry quickly plucked the leaves from their grasp. I know what these are. The thicker one is a favorite of the ilu. Leave it to dry for a few days before cutting it open. Harry said, handing the second leaf back to its owner, a young girl now orphaned from the storm, who was now letting out a rare smile. Timidly she asked the ilu, they will come back, won't they? She had made many friends with the sea creatures and missed their playful nature. Of course, trying to sound more confident than he was. I'm sure when they smell this tasty snack, there'll be so many ilus we won't know what to do with them. Harry started thinking of his friend back on his island. It almost felt strange not to hear its chirping for food at all hours. Turning to the last leaf and final member of the trio. And what a find! Harry called out, making sure to exaggerate. Fry it up in a bit of oil and it's delicious. If you give it to the cooks, I bet there'd be a reward in it for you. The leaf was one of those he had tested and was safe to eat, however had a very sour aftertaste. Thinking on it, he had better warn the cooks before they serve it up to him for the evening meal. The children, all now appeased and happy that they could help out, lunged at Harry for a hug. Harry's arms snaked around them and squeezed them close. For all his wealth and luxury in his last life, moments such as these, where he felt bonded and loved, were worth more to him than all the money in the world. The children soon took off, no doubt to make more mischief with the other adults when Sukal returned. You are very kind to the children. They often brought Harry their samples from the local bay, and despite most not being of great use, Harry would always make them smile and feel special. They are easy to be kind to. Sitting down next to Harry, Sukal took his hand in hers, slotting their fingers together. She leaned her head gently against his arm as they looked out at the tribe. The tent from his rotorcraft had become the infirmary, with the Navi working hard to rig up shelters from the wind and rain. Luckily, the storm's passing had made way for the warmer tropical weather to return. The fallen Navi had been taken to what was left of the spirit tree. The trunk may have been broken off, however the base where the reef people allowed their energy to return to Iwa still lived. The ceremony had been last night. A solemn affair with melancholic songs echoing across the sea. Harry had been included and, due to the lack of fit and able Na'vi, even helped to guide the Fallen to Iwa's final embrace. After, there were no more parties, no festive gatherings as may have happened on Earth. Instead, each Na'vi returned to their home to sing the final beat of their loved one's song. The tribe's numbers had been decimated from over 400 to less than 50. Many having not been recovered, washed out to sea beyond their reach. One of the surviving warriors, Doang, had been part of the Great Hunt, an event that happened once a season, where the majority of the hunters and warriors, including the awakens leader, would travel to the Skimwings breeding ground to secure more mounts for the next generation. The hunt had ended in tragedy. The breeding ground was in the direct path of the storm. In his moments of clarity, Doang had described the giant waves, the spiraling winds, and the great waves of lightning descending from the sky. The storm had taken the lives entire party except for him, and that was only by a fluke of luck. Doang still could pass to Iwa and was watched closely by Harry in the infirmary. His missing arm, the price of survival. Many of those that remained were the old, the sick, and the young. Those that were sequestered further into the roots of the world. They all worked hard at rebuilding what was there, mending the tribe. However, Harry could see it clearly, even if the rest of them couldn't. The tribe was dead. Without their spiritual leader, without the warriors to go hunting, without access to Iwa, the tribe was broken beyond repair. It was only a fool's hope that kept them all going. Sukul gently shook Harry awake. He looked around, still not used to waking up in this place. Harry had been without shelter, and when he did sleep, it was often next to the injured. Having given his one tent to be the infirmary and the planes still absent, he had few options available. Sukul, seeing this, had been insistent that he join her. They shared a hut together with another family and several young orphans. The hut wasn't fully repaired with large tiers letting a stream of light in, however it was one of the more complete huts still standing. The floor space was limited and so they all ended up sleeping in close proximity. As Harry rubbed his eyes groggily and sat up, he prepared for the day. If there was one thing he learned, it was that village life started early. There was a comfort in being so close, particularly with Sukul. Just the scent of her reminded him of the sea's breeze and made his heart flutter with joy. Harry couldn't deny his attraction to her. He even thought his feeling may be returned, but what could it lead to? Harry was born of the Sky People, the Destroyers. Sukul had her people to think after, it was where she belonged. Harry belonged nowhere, belonging to no one. He always knew, despite his best intentions, his second life on Pandora would never be easy. Could he burden someone else, someone that he cared for, with all his issues? Come, Harry. Today I show you the reef. She had tried several times, but had always been prevented by medical emergencies. The hollow tablet he kept beside his bed tracked his patient's life signs and pinged him if they started to deteriorate. Looking at it, he wouldn't be missed for an hour or two. Nodding his agreement, he went to put on his clothes when Sukul stopped him. Your human clothes are not good, Harry. Proudly presenting him with some more authentic Na'vi clothing. It was made of leather and consisted of a few components that covered the bare minimum of his anatomy. Looking at Sukul's expectant face, he didn't have the heart to refuse. With a quick change, Harry stood in his new loincloth, a leather strap across his chest holding a surprisingly sharp bone knife. A thin leather band circled his bicep, decorated with small shells, a sign of his belonging and link to the sea. Despite Harry's human sensibilities finding the lack of clothing outrageous, he needed to get used to it if he wanted to be accepted. Na'vi, as it turns out, had very little body shame. Smiling at Harry's transformation, finally starting to look more like a true Na'vi, Sukul led him to the water. Follow, she instructed before slipping into the water with barely a ripple. Not needing to be told twice, Harry took a deep breath and divided in after. His entry was not nearly as smooth, causing a large splash that the few onlookers chuckled at. Sukul was already far ahead by the time Harry had located her. Swimming past the plants, Harry could still see the signs of the storm. Empty sections of coral, now destroyed, or the great underwater flora ripped and damaged. Even then, there was an otherworldly beauty in this underwater world. Finally, Harry was able to reach where Sukul had been waiting on top of what seemed like a giant glowing mushroom. Trying to use his hands to ask what next, Sukul had been tutoring in their undersea language, but soon gave up. Learning Navi was one thing, but trying to learn Navi sign language was another extreme to his weary mind. A/N. For the sign language, I will use just single apostrophes, e.g., hello. She used one of the signs he recognized. Follow. Trailing behind her as she weaved through ancient coral formations, gently trailing her hands through the colored plants as she passed. The small creatures that swam or crawled through the ocean ignored the pair's presence, allowing Harry to see the ocean as the Navi saw it. Full of life. Mesmerizing. Feeling his lungs start to burn and his oxygen running out, Harry broke away and started to ascend. Paddling over to the closest dry land, a group of rocks that pushed out of the water near the center of the bay. He pulled himself up and tried to calm his breathing. He had been practicing swimming in his bay at home, however the ease the Sukul and the other reef people could navigate the water in a single breath left Harry in awe. Sukul quickly joined him, elegantly sliding up beside him. What is wrong, Harry? I can't last that long underwater, he admitted. You are new to the way of water. In time you will learn and swim as the reef people do. It was Harry's first time hearing this. What is the way of water? The way of water has no beginning and no end. The sea is around you and in you. The sea is your home before your birth and after your death. Sukul's words seemed to resonate with some deep primal aspect that had been hidden in his body all this time. His eyes shut in meditative concentration, shutting out all the noise of the world except for her musical voice. Our heart beats in the womb of the world. Our breath burns in the shadows of the deep. The sea gives and the sea takes. She placed her hands with his, as if in joint prayer. Water connects all things, life to death, darkness to light. Harry sat there, taking in her wisdom. His breathing now under control. No longer the fast, shallow gasps, but deep lungfuls of oxygen. You need to slow your heartbeat. Let the ocean pull your worries away. Placing her hand low down on his chest. You must breathe from here. Fill your body with air. Finally opening his eyes, he started at her as if for the first time. Sukul was young, yet her wisdom grew far beyond her years. Feeling more confident with his breathing, he divided back in. Harry lay awake that night. The memories of that morning haunted his every waking moment. Every curve of her body, every smile on her lips, every flick of her tail was seared into his brain, stoking his desire for her. He was fortunate no serious incidents arose with his patients, as he wasn't sure he would have been able to give them his full attention. Now he lay next to her. Mere inches separated their bodies. Seeing her fingers twitch ever so slightly, he could no longer resist. His fingers weaved into hers and gave a gentle squeeze. As she squeezed his hand back, he could finally drift off to sleep. Even as he lay there, unconsciousness calling him, he could feel both his and Sukul's smiles plastered on their faces. A whirring noise and the horns of the tribe watchmen woke Harry. Looking out, all Harry could see was darkness. What was it? He thought to himself. He needed to get out there and see. Sukul's head had been resting on his bare chest. It seemed in the night they had pulled each other closer. Delicately, he rolled her body to the side, letting her head rest back on the sleeping mat. He could feel her body start to shift and knew she was waking up. Standing up, Harry found where he had kept his pistol, the rest of his weapons having been stored in the infirmary. Slipping the stone knife into its scabbard on his chest, he left the hut. Around him, those more able joined him, their improvised weapons held tightly in their hands. Whatever the threat was, Harry hoped fishing nets and knives would be enough to scare it away. As he approached, the sounds became clearer, almost familiar. Looking out to sea, the water was calm, the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore, the reef illuminating parts of the ocean with its glow. Searching for the threat, Harry glanced upwards. The rotorcraft. It was over a week delayed since when it should have arrived, but it was here. Attached underneath and on either side were large metal containers. Sending a runner back to the shared hut for his hollow tablet, he tried to plan his next steps. The supplies would ease the suffering of the Na'vi and help him finally heal the remaining sick. He could use the plane to help scout for any lost survivors. The plane also represented his way off the island, away from Sukul. The thought was sobering. A selfish part of his mind wished that the plane had stayed lost. Organizing the supplies wasn't easy. When the word spread through the remaining villages that there was no threat, it was just the strange alien's metal mount. They crowded around. Harry had been telling them that their hardships would be eased when his supplies came. No longer feeling the stabs of hunger or lips cracking for want of fresh water, Harry unloaded what he could, entrusting the responsibility to distribute supplies to some of the elderly. Using a long red wire, he connected a smaller water filtration machine to his rotorcraft engine and a separate tube to the nearby beach. Just like Rasar, they had tried to dissuade him, however his actions had earned him some trust from the people. Sukul was the first one to try it and claim its safety, quickly followed by several of the children. Taking his new medical supplies over to the wounded, Harry's work started again. He could finally close many wounds, relieve pain, and clear the sickness from the Navi's bodies. Already Harry was seeing the effect, boosting their vital signs. Seeing Doang open his eyes, Harry moved to his side. Oh, how long he managed to wheeze out in between coughs. 2 days since he last woke, Harry informed him. But the medicine came today. Another week, and you'll be on your feet again. My thanks, brother. Harry clutched the warrior's hand tightly. It had been a close shave. Without the medicine, Doang might not have survived the night. Rest now, brother. With his rounds done in the infirmary, Harry had a question he needed answering. Squeezing into the cockpit felt strange. Wrong. The once comfortable chairs now felt foreign. Had he adjusted to Navi life so much that his own plane, his primary means of transport, was rejecting him? Ignoring his feelings, Harry pulled up the console. Why did it take so long? Looking at the logs was revealing. It seemed that the plane had managed to reach his island safely. Loaded up the supplies without issues, but then got lost on the return journey. The navigation records were heavily corrupted, with the plane not able to locate its destination. Harry knew the possibility that Pandora's magnetic interference could disrupt the plane's equipment, but he had taken every precaution. Each part was sealed and designed to ignore such issues. Harry was still learning. There was very little that was Pandora-proof. Lacking direction, the routine seemed to have fallen back on a search-by-grid method, flying over wide areas to re-establish a link or find common ground. Harry quickly scrolled through the sensor readings. The rotorcraft had traveled out far, covering a massive area of the sea. From his cursory glance, Harry could already identify several more island chains thriving with life and potentially holding tribes of Navi to explore. Moving to the end of the records, it seemed the interference died away, allowing the navigation system to reboot and locate this island. He could see Sukul waving to him, it being near the time for their daily swimming and breathing lessons. An alert on the screen caught his eye before he could put it away. Urgent. Hell's Gate. Just reading the title, Harry knew it was from the mining base. It must have picked up the message from his island, being so far out that he couldn't be reached directly. Pushing the device away, message unread, he returned to Sukul's waiting side. Human business could wait. The tribe was starting to heal. Most of the wounded, now patched up with Harry's medicine, pitched in to help the rebuilding efforts. The food and water shortages were solved, and there was a definite atmosphere of hope. Smiles could be seen on the faces of the villagers for the first time in weeks. Even the environment started to heal. Where the ocean floor had been stripped, buds of new life started blooming. The fish started to return in great swarms, happy to be home. Even Harry wanted to call out to thank Iwa for her blessing. Sitting on top of the rotorcraft, finding some privacy to think, he could observe the comings and goings of the tribe with ease. The fishermen expertly tossed their nets and pulled in great catches of fish. Divers glided through the water, returning with bountiful shellfish. Workers stripped back the damaged trees and started to repair the old huts, even starting to rebuild the walkways which connected the tribe together. Sukul was teaching a group of children in the water, not dissimilar to his own lessons. It was a strange sensation. Harry was on the outside looking in. In the crisis, he had been one of the people. A brother. A Navi. But now there was a growing distance between him and the others. It wasn't anything they said or did, but it was that lack of purpose. He had been there to help them recover. In many ways he had succeeded. So well that he was no longer needed. The question hung in the air like a bad smell, his mind filled with possibilities, but no clear path forward. What should I do now? Sukul had found him there several hours later. Pulling him down the water's edge, Harry couldn't help but comment. We've already had our lesson for today. Harry, this is no lesson. Sinking down in the water, Harry obediently followed. They swam together like two planets, never able to escape the other's gravity. They weaved under reefs and over reefs. Past the fishermen's and gathers. Past the children playing games. The pair swam until all the worries and concerns over the future were bled out. Until the way of water had centered him in peace and contentment. Finally close enough to touch, their arms circled each other. Not willing to let them go. Why so sad, Harry? Looking at her with all the love he could muster, his voice came out cracked and raw. I'm not needed here anymore. You don't need me. Placing her head on his chest and hearing his strong heartbeat was a balm to her mind. I need you, my Harry. I need you too. My ray of starlight. My Sukul. Running a finger down her cheek and placing a rouge strand of hair behind her ear. Ol Ngadi Kami, I see you, Sukul whispered, now locking eyes with the man she had chosen. Ol Ngadi Kami, I see you. Not bothering to try and resist his desires any further, Harry brought his mouth to hers in a long sensual kiss. Sucking on her bottom lip, not wanting there to be any distance between them. Their bodies closed together, pushing the water out from between their chests until blue skin rubbed blue skin. Slowly, unwillingly, Harry pulled his head back to stare into blue eyes. No words were needed, nor vows or promises. They both knew what was in their hearts. From this moment on they were one. Chirp. 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 A chorus of voices called out from the sea. The new couple looked outwards, trying to recognize the source. As if on cue, Ilu heads poked out from the sea. The pack finally returning home to their Navi family. Shouts came from the shoreline. The Ilu have returned. The cry was echoed from the old and the young as the Navi leapt into the water. The Ilu, equally excited, swam up to their loved ones and chirped out greetings and the desire for fish. One of the Ilu, green stripes down its flank, approached the couple, nudging its head lovingly against Sukul's chest. Euro. Sukul called out before sliding onto its back and making the bond. Her eyes fluttered as she took in the sensations, the memory of the creature. Leaning down, she gave it a gentle kiss on its brow. It is good to see you too, Euro. Looking at Harry, she explained. Euro was my mother's Ilu. Pulling Harry up behind her, they took off. Harry, with his arms tightly wrapped around Sukul's taut stomach, could do little more than hold on for dear life. The sea shot past at fantastic speed, effortlessly weaving through the waves. With a great splash, the Illa shot out the water, diving up and back towards the waiting water. Harry, so surprised at the move, forgot to keep his grip and found himself flung sideways into the water, skipping over it like a stone. Reaching the surface, spluttering and spitting out the salty water he'd swallowed, he waited until Sukul returned to him, looking radiantly happy. She separated the bond and swam over to him. The Ilu waited to the side, looking down at him. Splash! The Ilu used its flippers to send a spray of water into Harry's face. Before Harry could think of retribution, it divided away. Its chirping laughter, mocking him. Sukul could help but laugh. It had been so long since she had laughed, it felt good to let it all out. Soon Harry couldn't help but chuckle too. Ilus were renowned for their playful nature. Pulling her into another kiss, he looked around. The whole tribe was out and meeting the Ilu. They rode and jumped through the water with such joy that you could forget the horrors they had so recently faced. Using her fingers to comb Harry's wild hair, Sukul spoke softly to her other half. Now that the Ilus are back, my Harry, it's time to complete your training. You don't mean? Of course. How can you be one of the people if you don't ride? Sahelu is how we connect to all of Iwa's children, my Harry, Sukul told him. When bonded, we share all our senses, our memory, our strengths. Her hand gently traced his chest, around his body until she held his braid. A shiver of pleasure and nervousness ran through his spine. Mating as a Navi was different from humans. While there was the physical aspect, Harry was at least familiar with this part. There was also a spiritual one where two Navi could join their cues, neural connection, to truly become one in the eyes of Iowa. Sukul and Harry may have dedicated themselves to each other. However, they were only considered a mated pair when they performed Sahelu, the bond. Something he didn't know if he was ready for. Handing back his braid, Sukul instructed him, "Make the bond." Feeling nervous and knowing that he had run out of excuses, he brought his cue to the Ilu floating patiently in front of him. It was one of the Ilu who had no family to return to, and so Harry had been offered its services. The pink tendrils of nerves reached out to each other until they could link together and create a solid connection. Sahelu. Alien sensations flooded his mind, making his knees weak. The Ilu flicked its tail, trying to adapt to his mind. Sukul's voice reached out, trying to calm both. Nimue. Calm, feel her heartbeat. As she spoke, Harry could feel the Ilu's heart beating steadily as if it was his own. He started to feel more, his legs gone, replaced by flippers. He could feel the cool water beating and running down his neck. Feel her breath. Opening his mouth to take a deep breath, the Ilu followed Harry's lead, its flanks rising and falling in time to his. The two creatures now existed as one. Harry could feel the Ilu's mind and desires. The sudden urge to dive down to the reef was almost irresistible. He felt himself fidgeting, needing to be moving. You can tell her what to do through here. Sukul pointed to his head. You must focus on what you want. Climbing on with equal parts trepidation and excitement, Harry gripped the harness. Deciding to try something simple to start with, Harry thought swim. Splash! The Ilu took off, shooting through the water. Harry's one hand barely hanging on, becoming more of a dead weight than a rider. The water spray assaulted his face. One course correction flung Harry off in an all-too-familiar way. Trying to hide her laughter, Sukul mounted Euro and came over. My Harry, look at me. She positioned herself on the Ilu. Her feet locked on the shoulder bone, similar to how he had done it. This strong position out of water only. I think it's the in-water part I'm finding hard. Harry replied sarcastically. He was ignored. Sukul moved her body, her feet further back and head resting on the Ilu's body. This how you dive. Good position, very important. Looking at her example, Harry could see his mistake. Going that fast underwater, the pressure was immense. He needed to be as streamlined as possible. Again. It was several hours later that the pair emerged from the ocean. Harry was bone-tired, with every muscle screaming out for rest. He had improved, able to ride the Ilu with at least some control. He had worked on his positioning with Sukul rigorously until she was satisfied, but his entries when diving in the water still caused him issues. Sukul was a brutal taskmaster who demanded he practice more and more. It seemed there was no special knack for it except experience. Pulling his weary body to a cooking fire and collapsing beside it, ignoring Sukul's comments of continuing his practice after the food was dismissed by his brain as too painful to process. Finally sitting down, a bowl of hot broth in his hands, he could finally relax and rest. Harry! Harry! Turo came running up to the pair. The elders have called a tribal meeting. Come quick. It seemed rest was to be postponed yet again. Not having the option to refuse, Harry was pulled along to the largest hut. Orona, as one of the oldest living of the tribe, had taken charge of the meeting. The sea gives and the sea takes, Orona quoted the way of water Sukul had been teaching him. All the Navi sitting in the circle nodded. Our tribe is left broken. Our leaders rest with Iowa while we are cut off from her guidance and love. More nods from the crowds, with some of the elders calling out Great Mother in prayer. This has been our home for many generations. Now we face the tough decision. You can't mean. Sukul called out in shock. Yes, child. Relocation. We need a new home. Her words immediately sparked debate. Navi against Navi. This was their tribe's home, having been protected and cultivated for hundreds of years. Now they might have to leave. Hear my words. Orona tried to silence the crowd. What is necessary is not always easy. This is the Great Mother's will. At that, the chattering stopped. All Navi held Iowa in the utmost respect. At first light, we sent scouts to search for somewhere suitable. Harry watched as Sukul and a group of the strongest hunters mount their Ilus. Are you sure I can't join you? I don't like the idea of you doing this without me, Harry complained to her. Again. You are not ready for the water beyond the reef. Stay here, train with your Ilu. But what if I follow in? No, Harry. Seeing her lover's downturned face, Sukul reached out and pulled him close. We need Suraks, Skimwings, if we are to find a new home. Scouts reported seeing a migrating flock nearby. The danger. This is our way. My people have hunted the Suraks since the time of the first songs. Trust me, Harry. Giving her a long kiss goodbye, Sukul and the other dived into the water and sped towards the open ocean. I guess it's just us left? Harry spoke to the Ilu that was following him. He thought of all the wisdom the Navi possessed and considered another phase to be added to the list that perfectly summed his current life up. When in doubt, practice, splash. Harry and his mount flew from the sea before expertly diving back in. Underwater, Harry raced past the strange fish and colorful plants. He saw a group of children swimming above him, their legs dangling down, and couldn't help but embrace the Ilu's playfulness. Accelerating as hard she could, the Ilu rocketed out the water, arching over their heads to splash next to them. Harry, with only a short moment before taking off and landing, waved at their shocked faces before positioning himself properly for the landing with practiced ease. With Sukul gone the last few days, he had little to do but practice. At first, it was painful. The aches of tensing muscles and used until now burned like fire, but he didn't stop. With every practice, every failure, his body strengthened. The rhythm of the water became increasingly clear. The lessons Sukul had been teaching him all along, the way of water echoed in his mind. The sea is your home before your birth and after your death, and for once he felt at home. Here on this remote island, with the woman he loved and the ocean that had embraced him. And then one day, it clicked. The water was no longer a barrier that held him back. Instead, Harry could feel the pulse of the ocean, pushing him forward. His whole mindset shifted. He didn't need to work against the sea, but with it. Harry was finally able to ride the Ilu like a native, navigating the reef with an ease he would have thought impossible weeks before. Sahelu now was an everyday occurrence. The Ilu became increasingly in tune with his commands as they forged a stronger bond. Harry had even grown fond of her, making sure to take equal care of her. He would scrub her back, rub her flippers, and fetch her favorite snacks. She was not a pet, but rather a partner to cherish. Harry was now starting to appreciate the close link the Navi had to this world. The destruction that humans were so good at, that he had sanctioned by his inaction, now shocked him. If he could form an emotional bond with an Ilu, which was lower down in Pandora's creature hierarchy, then the killing of all those beasts was simply murder. Aru. The Navi watchman blew into the seashell, the note carrying clear across the bay. The hunting party had returned. At the entrance of the reef, where the ocean tides met the bay's protected inlet, the waves were high. On the crest of a wave, Harry spotted the hunting party returning triumphantly. For Suraks, Skimwings, proudly flew at the front of the party, their gray tails slicing the water below as their black and orange wings held them aloft. The tribe had come out of the homes at the signal and started to cheer and shout. Suraks represented true hunters, and hunters were in turn the tribe's strength. Each Surak was twice the size of an Ilu and could accelerate through the water much faster as well. Their wings could be folded to their side when speeding underwater and then unfurl to glide through the air when needed. The Suraks couldn't fly like an Ikran, Banshee, as they still needed to keep their tail in the water to propel them forward. The Tsurak most dangerous weapon, however, was its long jaw of razor teeth that could simultaneously slice and crush most creatures. As the hunting party returned, he could make out that Sukul was mounted on one of the Tsuraks. Harry's jaw nearly dropped. He knew that Sukul went with the hunting party, as to subdue a Tsurak often required 2 or 3 Navi, but to be chosen as one of the riders was a great honor and responsibility. Gliding up the bay, Sukul quickly dismounted and threw herself into Harry's arms. The time separating them too long. Pulling his face down to her, Sukul initiated the kiss, making sure to savor every moment. "Are you hurt?" Harry whispered. Hunts were dangerous. The village people told tales of hunts where several young hunters had been slain by their would-be mounts. Shaking her head, she nestled into his strong arms. The couple moved away from the celebration happening on the shore for the victorious hunters, looking for some more privacy. Nestled under an overhanging fruit tree on the far side of the bay, the lovers explored each other's bodies hungrily. Every touch a sensual caress, bringing them to the height of ecstasy. Every trail of kisses across their bodies, moving them ever closer to climax in ripples of pleasure. As they made love on the sands of Pandora, Harry's dedication to Sukkel grew with every thrust. From this moment on, she was his and he was hers. Stopping only before they made the Tsahelu, Harry and Sukkel lay together, their breathing ragged and their entangled bodies bared to the stars. Tracing the glowing patterns of dots on Harry's chest, Sukkel finally broke the silence. "We begin the search for a new home at sunrise." The words broke their bliss and threw Harry into a whirlwind of nightmares. She would need to leave again, to be gone for weeks at a time, searching distant islands. And the best-case scenario, the tribe finds a new home. What happens to him then? He pondered silently. Was his home with the Na'vi, with Sukkel, or did he belong back on his island and his technology? Running his blue hands through her braided hair, eliciting a small moan of pleasure, he wasn't sure how to broach the topic with the woman he loved more than life itself. How could he explain that he might have to leave one day without breaking her heart? Harry flicked the switch, turning on his scanning equipment. The islands below had started to fade together, his brain struggling to differentiate the many islands he and Sukkel had scouted this last week. Looking down at the sea, he caught sight of her body ascending the waves with regal elegance. His heart burned to be down there with her, dancing through cresting waves in harmony with each and this miraculous world. Being stuck in a metal box, not able to swim freely through the water, had never been more frustrating. Not willing to be separated so soon, Harry had persisted with his demand to help her scout a new home. Sadly, Elos were ill-suited for long-distance travel, and so he had to improvise using his rotorcraft. It was lonely during the day, not able to speak to his love, only spectating from afar, but at least if they found an island to rest on, they could be together. They had found many islands with a wide variety of conditions. Some were barren, others bountiful. Some had great reefs to provide shelter to the island, some did not. They even found some islands that seemed more beautiful and ideal for the Na'vi to settle on. However, all the islands surveyed had the same critical flaw: no spirit tree. The main reason to relocate the tribe was to reconnect to their deity, to be able to bask in her eternal love. The tribe would never agree to uproot their life somewhere that didn't process a spirit tree. That night, as they feasted on freshly caught fish, Harry couldn't help but ask, "How much further are we going?" Already, he was trying to imagine the logistical nightmare of getting all the villages this far, many forced to ride Elos. The Ilus would have to be rested several times throughout the day, which would mean they would have to plan their journey to travel between island rest points. A long and arduous prospect that would add many days to their journey. Shaking her head sadly, "We've already gone past the point agreed. I only hope the other team has had better luck." With her and Harry forming one scouting team, the other three Zurich, Skim Wing, riders traveled in a different direction. "What happens if we can't find a spirit tree?" Looking out at the open water, Sukkel whispered the fear that had been eating away at her ever since her return to her people. Disband. Join another tribe. But while there had been conflict between Na'vi tribes, it was rare. Each tribe represented a history of honor and memories that disbanding would see vanish in the sands of history. The consequences of failing to find a home, now very real. "Do you interact with the other tribes much?" Harry asked softly, trying to pull his lover's mind away from dark thoughts. Nodding, Sukkel explained further. "We often trade with tribes. Many specialize in certain products. The Tipani tribe are great fishermen. Their tribes produce the most beautiful shells. Pointing further east, the Nanning tribe are great crafters. The knives they make are the sharpest." Looking down at his chest, he saw the knife that Sukkel had given to him in what felt like a lifetime ago. "Yes, Harry. My fathers traded for it on an expedition many moons ago." Leaning over and giving her a light kiss on the lips, now appreciative of the significance of the gift. It was likely the last item of her family she possessed, yet she had given it to him. Coughing and trying to focus on her information again, Sukkel continued. "To the west is the Metkayina clan. They're known to be the greatest hunters. Few dares to make trouble with them. Recognizing the name, Harry chipped in. I've been there. Met them. Sukkel turned in his arms to look at him. This was the first she had heard this. I was following these giant whale-like creatures, larger than anything I'd seen before. Their bodies seemed to be decorated with patterns. Tolkien. Sukkel called out. He hadn't ever seen her this excited before. He assumed that as reef people, she would have seen plenty of them before. You really saw Tolkien, my Harry? Nodding, he continued. They were what led me to the Metkayuna tribe. I tried to introduce myself, to learn from them. I wasn't welcome, so I had to leave. Holding Sukkel close to him, he muttered lovingly. And if they hadn't, I might never have met you, my love. For the first time, she looked at her alien lover in envy. The Tolkien are sacred to the reef people, Harry. Only the largest, most blessed tribes are visited by the Tolkien in their migration. I have even heard of Navi bonding with them, soul brothers and sisters. I have dreamed of seeing one up close since I was a cub. Harry's lips smiled at the image. This world is filled with wonders, my little cub. Sukkel nudged him in the ribs, causing him to yelp in protest. We can see it all. Travel to the distant tribes of hills and deserts. Search the ocean for your destined Tolkien partner. We can do it all. Sukkel snuggled further into his embrace. I don't need all that, my Harry. Iwa has blessed me with you. I need nothing else except the feel of your arms around me. Together, Harry whispered. He had no desire to be separated from his love, but there was a heavy sensation in his heart. He could feel the delicate peace he had established under threat. Every extra second together was a blessing from Iwa, but Harry knew it wouldn't last forever. His retirement would never be that easy. Beep. The knight's peace was disrobed by an alert from the rotorcraft. Disentangling himself from Sukkel's loving embrace, he wearily went to check. Urgent. Hell's Gate. It seemed the mining base had sent him another message. He was impressed it managed to reach him all the way out in the ocean. They must have boosted the signal by sending it through an orbiting satellite, he thought idly. Deciding that ignoring two urgent messages was risky, he opened the communication. Quickly, he rated his choice. Reading through the information and then going back to the previous message to understand the context. He let out a breath and swore, Waya. Damn. Selfridge had commissioned a team of Avatar scientists to tour many of the Navi tribes they were aware of. It was an amazing opportunity that took them deep into unexplored regions to have first contact with the various Navi tribes beyond the Omaticea. It was the sort of research expedition that Harry would have given his left arm for when he first arrived on Pandora. Even now, after living with a Navi tribe, he still felt a pang of regret that he ignored his invitation. The following message was to request his aid. The shit had hit the fan. Reading on, Harry was shocked to see many of the familiar names attached to the report. Rai, Willow, and other Avatar drivers he had met were now being held hostage by a Navi tribe. The first message had been from Selfridge, a clear ploy to ease tensions between them, but the second was from someone else. The name didn't ring a bell, so he searched his records and found it to be a scientist working with the Avatar program. Max. Struggling to find a reason he had contacted him, he was hardly the Avatar rescue line. He searched deeper into the data. The offending tribe was located surprisingly close to his island home, and the images recorded on them showed a familiar marking. Then he saw it. In the background of a picture was a familiar face. Aresar. The news only got worse from there. Max had sent word that Quaritch was preparing his mercenaries to retrieve them. Even if he had to eradicate the tribe as an example. It was going to be war. Harry watched Sukkel sleeping for a short moment. She was so peaceful, so enchanting that he hated himself for what he had to do next. Gently shaking her shoulders, she sleepily pushed him away. Not now, Harry. She mumbled. The insatiable alien needed to learn to pick better times for their mating. Sukkel. Something in his voice mustered to wakefulness. Harry? What has happened? I need to leave. The words slipped out, Harry feeling as if a hot knife was carving his heart up while he stared into her confused ocean blue eyes. Leave? Harry, we return to the tribe after sunup, then we can. No, Sukkel. I need to leave. Now. I need to return to the Sky People. Tears welled in her eyes. not able to understand why. They had been so happy, why must their union be broken now? Holding her face, trying to convey his unending love, he tried to explain. I've got word my friends are in danger. I need to protect them. To stop a war. Then I come with you, Sukal said, not wanting to hear any arguments. Stroking her hair and locking their lips together in loving desperation. No. You are needed here. Your tribe needs you. Accepting it slowly, she looked at Harry as if for the first time. He was no great warrior or hunter, that had been clear to her since their first fateful meeting. He was more of a curious child that had wormed his way into her heart, but now she saw something different. Her Harry had a strong heart. Then go, my Harry, protect your friends and return to me. Their bodies crushed together then, kissing passionately, neither willing nor wanting to let the other go. Before he succumbed too deeply to the pleasures of the flesh, Harry separated and returned to the rotorcraft, only turning back to leave a communication device with his love, a hope they may be able to see each other despite the distance. Rising high in the night sky, Harry looked down at Sukal's rapidly shrinking form. Alone, the flight was long. Several days on the continuous flight had left him severely irritated, but refused to divert to an island to stretch his legs. As the sun set on his third day of travel, the sea's horizon broke with the mainland's white cliffs. Checking his scanners, he mentally repositioned himself. His island was just over the horizon to the west. The tribe's location, which was holding several of his friends hostage, was 100 clicks or so ahead. The report said they made their home in one of the sky trees that rose higher than all the surrounding forest. Finally flying over the mainland again, his eyes took a second to adjust to all the green. He had become so used to the ocean-rich blues and turquoise that it shocked his system. In the distance, the sky tree was now visible. The tribe's home. Our home. Landing his plane on a flat area of ground, he took measures of his supplies. Harry was still dressed as one of the reef people, so used to it now that he didn't even consider human-style clothing anymore. On his back, a rucksack with a communication module. He would need to talk to Hell's Gates, the mining base, to help with the negotiation. He picked up his rifle before placing it back down. If he needed that, then he had failed. Instead, choosing to pick a carved wooden staff to defend himself from the dangers of the forest. Dong had been teaching him the way of the spear since he had left the infirmary. After seeing Harry's first attempt with a bladed spear, he had declared that Harry needed to train with a staff first. Something about not wanting his doctor to turn into another patient. With a command from his hollow tablet, he sent a plane back to the island. This close to his island, he was confident he could summon it back when needed. Taking his first steps into the jungle, he couldn't but feel excited. It was good to be back.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.